this meeting via webinar today as a matter of safety, as well as to allow broad participation from across the state. And I will now hand it over to Farah Anderson from Cadmus to walk us through the procedures for today's meeting before we jump into the agenda.
Thanks, Sarah. Great, thanks, Sarah. As always, just to ensure we have another smooth and productive meeting, and we can go to that slide. For reference, I just want to remind the council members of our logistics and procedures. The first is to simply remain on mute if you're not speaking, to limit background noise. The tech team will also continue to monitor members to ensure they're muted. We do encourage council members to join on video if you're able, which I think we've just tested that folks are familiar with, but there is a cue on this slide here, if that's helpful. If you are ready to share a question or a thought, please use the raise your hand function using the raise your hand icon on your screen. That'll indicate you'd like to speak. And if you are called upon, then please unmute yourself and then remute yourself following your comment. In the event of roll call votes, we would hope to work through the logistics pretty smoothly and walk through in alphabetical order, placing your vote saying aye or no. And finally, if you do have other technical questions or concerns, there is an email address on the slide, nys.cac@cadmusgroup.com, that you can reach out to if any issues arise. And I will pass back over to Sarah and the co-chairs.
Thank you, Farah. Let's turn to calling roll to see which members of the council are in attendance today. Would NYSERDA's Valerie Milanovic call roll?
I sure will. Can you still hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Perfect. Great. Okay. Good afternoon, council members. When I call your name, please acknowledge your participation in today's Climate Action Council meeting. Commissioner Harris, Co-Chair Harris.
Good afternoon.
Co-Chair Sagos.
Afternoon, folks.
Commissioner Ball.
A very good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Donna DeCarolis.
Good afternoon, all.
Commissioner Dominguez.
If Commissioner's not joined, Ron Epstein is here.
Hi, Ron. Thank you. Gavin Donahue.
Good afternoon. Happy to be here.
Dennis Elsenbeck.
Here.
CEO Falcone.
Here.
On behalf of Empire State Development, Kevin Hansen. Or Vince. Vince Ravishare.
Here.
Okay, great. Thanks, Vince. Rose Harvey. Chair Christian.
Present.
Bob Howard.
I'm here. Thank you.
Peter Iwanowitz.
I'm here.
I have word that Chancellor Malatras will probably be running late. CEO Driscoll.
Present.
Commissioner Reardon. I thought I saw her earlier.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, I can. Thank you, Commissioner.
Okay, thanks.
Ann Reynolds.
Here, hello.
Hello. On behalf of Secretary Rosado, Keisha Santiago Martinez.
Here.
Raya Salter.
Here, thank you.
Paul Shefson.
I'm here. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Commissioner Visnauskas.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. On behalf of Commissioner Zucker, Henry Splitoff.
I'm here. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Council co-chairs, I note the presence of a quorum for this afternoon's Climate Action Council meeting.
Great. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Hope you all had a really wonderful Thanksgiving and are safe and healthy in light of the COVID pandemic, which appears to never want to go away. But on to business. You all see the agenda in front of you right now. We'll start with a consideration of the minutes from the last meeting, which was, well, a little more than a month away, behind us now. Dorian and I have some remarks and reflections. Carl Maas will then get into the new job study that we're excited to discuss with you all. Sarah will then pick up the discussion of the development of the draft scoping plan, which I know you all have received and looked at and given us some feedback on, which has been very important. So we'll walk through all of that, as well as some staff proposed resolutions to that feedback. And I guess very importantly, we want to give clear direction to staff. Over the next month or so, we need to turn around I guess a revised final draft scoping plan for all of us to review and consider at the December meeting. So let's be as clear as we can today to staff. We will vote on the release of that in December. I want to thank staff. They've been working extraordinarily hard. If all of you have had a chance to look at the scoping plan, it is an extraordinary document, 300 plus pages. Behind that, hundreds of thousands of hours of work has gone into this. So thank you all to the staff and all the folks on the outside that have been helping us on this. Next slide, please. So let's proceed with the consideration of the minutes from the last meeting. You all received the minutes. Is there any feedback thus far? Any discussion? Okay. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? The streak continues. Unanimous approval of the minutes. Thank you. Those will be posted on our website. Next slide, please. So just a few remarks and reflections right up front, as we customarily do. Next slide. We've talked for some time about the importance of communications. All of us embrace that, no matter our perspective and our background, and we embrace that as well. So we're very excited, as I think you all know, to announce that we've hired here at DEC Haley Vicaro, who is our new Strategic Director of Communications for Climate. You probably know Haley from many years around government here in Albany, having served on Governor Hochul's transition team. Prior to that, Deputy Communications Director for Energy and the Environment in the governor's office. Prior to that, with the governor, then Lieutenant Governor as Communications Director, and before that was really out in the street as Gannett News, Albany Business Review, and the Daily Gazette reporter. So she knows her way around Albany, and she knows climate change. Really excited to have her here. I know she's reached out to all of you, and will become a very important voice and colleague of ours as we look to communicate the very complex nature of this transition and all of our work on the scoping plan. So welcome aboard, Haley. I know she's listening on today. Next slide, please. So it's been a busy month. Dorian and I had the great privilege of traveling to Glasgow for COP26. We were in good company as well. We had a couple of council members there, Bob and Raya, who we had a chance to spend some time with, which was really important for us. Many other New Yorkers as well, Peggy Shepard, Aaron Mayer. There's some House and Senate representation as well, and many business leaders. So New York was well represented. Really was an honor to represent Governor Hochul at that really important event. So I'll speak for Dorian and I. I think we both came away feeling very optimistic. We didn't achieve everything that we as a collective need. In the sense that we hit some of these milestones on methane, we hit milestones on deforestation, agreements with China, agreements to talk with China, but we as a international body did not reach all of the agreements that we were expecting. Commitments to phase out fossil fuels, concrete targets on the 1.5 degrees, and certainly support to developing nations. So there's quite a bit of work left to be done. Obviously, the groups will get together, all the nations will get together in a year in Egypt. One thing that's relevant for all of us, I think, is just the importance of our work here in New York. I mean, we are, again, the world's 10th largest economy. We're well ahead of the game on planning for this transition. We have shovels in the ground across the state. of course, but we are as a subnational entity helping to really lead the way and learn from others, of course, but really lead the way on this. So it's really important that we as a council recognize that and that we're in the focus of many other world leaders and subnational leaders who are striving to hit the same marks that New York has made. So congratulations to you all for your work thus far. It has been recognized really worldwide. So thank you. Doreen, you have exciting announcements to make.
Yes, and good afternoon to everyone. I hope you're all buckled in and ready for another action-packed meeting today for sure. Before I get into the next item of reflection, I wanted to pause for a moment of personal recognition in celebration of the birthday of our fearless Climate Action Council leader, the one and only Sarah Osgood. I don't know, Sarah, if it was frustrating or fitting to have today's meeting land on your birthday, but we figured we'd take the opportunity to provide some minor public embarrassment and more importantly, some major birthday congratulations. So Sarah, please know you have all of our deep thanks for your stewardship and leadership. We certainly wouldn't be anywhere near where we are today without your work. And we have important work ahead, so we're fortunate you're here on your birthday to continue to be at the helm for us. So thank you. And hopefully next year we'll all be cutting a cake together for birthdays and scoping plans alike. So happy birthday, Sarah. And onward to the next slide, please. Indeed, we had a major announcement earlier today, in fact, with Governor Hochul announcing that we at NYSERDA have finalized our contracts with Clean Path New York and the Hydro-Quebec Energy Services contract for the Champlain-Hudson Power Express. These are two major projects that were announced during Climate Week, and today we have finalized those contracts and filed them for comment and approval with the Public Service Commission. These are, frankly, a very big deal with respect not only to their ability to deliver this clean, renewable solar, wind, and hydroelectric power from upstate New York and Canada to New York City, but also transformative with respect to the benefits that they will bring statewide, really, inclusive of greenhouse gas reductions and air quality improvements, as well as economic development investments. And all told, these are the largest transmission projects contracted for New York State in the last 50 years and will reduce the city's fossil fuel use for electricity by more than 80% in 2030 when combined with our other clean energy investments. So it's a big milestone, and it is one that is bolstered by the support of the City of New York that I think is critical to also include, that they are joining with us as a state in these landmark awards, helping to make the scale of these projects possible while reducing the cost impact in the rest of state. So it's exciting, it's a big milestone, and I would say it's a moment to reflect not only on the progress we've made, but the progress we will be making together and that which we will be discussing today. So with that, we'll turn to the formal agenda, and we certainly do have a big agenda before us today. So if we turn to the next slide, let's dive right in. Next up, we have Carl Maas, who will give us an update on the integration analysis modeling work, as well as present on the Clean Energy Industry Report and preliminary Just Transition Working Group job study results. So Carl will be joined by Phil Jordan from BW Research, who has helped to lead some of this jobs work as well. So Carl, please take it away.
Great, thank you, President Harris. It's great to be with you all again. As was noted, I'm joined by Phil Jordan, who is Vice President and Principal Researcher for BW Research, where he leads his firm's energy practice. Phil is probably known by many. He's been working with New York for several years on our Clean Energy Industry Report, and it's really been a privilege for us to work with Phil and his team. He also brought in a couple of other folks to help with the job study, and that includes Industrial Economics, Inc. and Inclusive Economics. You'll see a theme in their names. And really, it's building off of the success and hard work of the Just Transition Working Group. So we'll give at least a nod to that strong work group and what they've been able to bring forward for the council. Next slide. So we've really focused the last few weeks on jobs analysis, but I did want to give you all an update on the integration analysis. Next slide. So just a quick one, and again, please. Wanted to give an update on some of the work streams and some of the work that we put up on our website. So this has been a slide hopefully you're getting used to seeing. So it's our climate resources website. So we have our links here, and on the right is the resources page. We've now updated that page, so it has all of the integration analysis. So every scenario that we've run, all of the key inputs and drivers. We've also pulled out all of our key presentations. So we've extracted them from the council meetings and put them all in one place. We also have a link to supplemental resources that will take you offsite onto NYSERDA's and DEC's page. And on those sub-pages within those other domains, we've also posted our supporting studies. So that's on HFCs, on RNG potential in the state. So there are some really great technical studies that we've also posted on our agency pages. So that's all been updated and live. I also wanted to put in a plug here for the other side of the coin, which is our adaptation work. And so for those who aren't aware, we've had for many years, NYSERDA sponsored the New York Climate Science Clearinghouse. And so that's a great website where we have a whole lot of tools and information for communities and for the state at large to think about how they can adapt to a changing climate, and also some great case studies on how communities are making a change now. And then we spoke previously about our New York State climate assessment. So we do have a website live, which gives a breakdown of what we will be doing over the next 2 years. So really these are parallel efforts, but I just wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of those resources. Next slide, please. So just a quick update on what's going to be coming next. And so again, as I mentioned, we really focused the past few weeks on our jobs analysis and working with our Just Transition Working Group and our consultants. But we are working in parallel on a number of other fronts that we've mentioned before. So we're continuing to refine our scenario 4, and I'll be bringing forward benefit cost analysis for that at the next meeting. We're also keenly interested in completing some of the promises we made around sensitivities. So we will be exploring a sensitivity around higher adoption rates for ground source and district heat pumps. You know, it is not the case that every home and apartment in New York could adopt a ground source system. So we do think there would be a role for district heating that may be sourced by water or ground or other resources. So we will be exploring that to, again, give us some better insights into the technical feasibility and also some of those cost trade-offs. And so while it may be more expensive to invest in these upfront, we also will see system benefits through a smaller grid. So we'll be bringing that forward next month. We also want to show, even though we've embedded quite a bit of flexibility, so that's animated load, that's active EV charging and vehicle to grid, we've embedded that in our current modeling. We also wanted to look even more aggressive at some of those technologies and control systems that are on the horizon to really show what the potential is. So we'll be looking at greater grid flexibility and really load flexibility in our sensitivity to, again, give us some insights into the cost trade-offs into what some of the opportunities might be. We've also heard a request from some council members to do give a little more detail on how the scenarios represent and map back onto our advisory panel work product. So that's not so much new analysis, but that's doing a better job at explaining our work. So we will commit to bringing that forward. And then I had mentioned at the previous meeting that we've done some uncertainty analysis. You know, we know that 30+ years is a long time horizon. Forecasting what fuel costs will be, forecasting what technology costs will be is hard and is uncertain. And so we have done some uncertainty analysis around that, which I want to bring forward, which I think really speaks to some of the talking points I had last time, where we saw some interesting differences between our scenarios, but really we see them on similar scales when we layer on top that uncertainty analysis. And so I think we have much to learn from each of those scenarios. And when we bring forward our fourth scenario, but it's important for us to really frame that around on the uncertainty that exists in the system. So that I will bring next month. Next slide. So with that, just trying to move quickly and get to some of the jobs work. And I also know that I'm partly in the way of really digging into the feedback on the plan itself. So we will move as efficiently and clearly as possible and try to give some time for any Q&A. Next slide. And with this, I'll turn it over to Phil, and he can speak a little bit to the Clean Energy Industry Report, and then I'll take it back to help frame up what the job study is.
Thanks, Carl. And I'll just briefly talk about the Clean Energy Industry Report. This is the annual industry report that we've conducted for the last 5 years now with our friends at NYSERDA. Many of you are probably familiar with this report in the past. This is the report that's really sort of the benchmarking and annual tracking of jobs. So we look at the clean energy and traditional energy jobs across different technology sectors, across different industry segments in the value chain. This year, the report, which just, I believe, released last week, highlights the impacts of COVID-19 on the sector. And to just give a brief note on that, New York really sort of, while still being impacted negatively by the COVID-19 pandemic, experienced a much less dramatic decline than the national average and many of the peers. And when we talked to employers about that, the feedback that we received was that one, it was good handling of the pandemic generally as a state. So after the initial wave, being able to continue to keep people safe and the economy moving, but also very specific to clean energy, very clear policy guidance that New York was remaining open for business, and that the work that could be done safely with protective measures at outdoors, distance, all those kinds of things should continue, and that New York was not going to back away from its commitments. So employers felt the certainty that they needed to continue to bring workers back throughout the last year and a half. We also explored some specific sectors. Offshore wind is obviously an important one that we looked at, as well as clean transportation, a lot of activity around the supply chain potential for electric vehicles, a lot of exciting findings there that we hope you'll review, as well as issues surrounding priority populations, which include environmental justice communities, rural communities, communities of color, low-income communities, veterans, and others. So lots of really new, I think, deep dives and fresh information in the report. So this is what we used, I think what we used to call the job study, but now very clear in our language. This is the Clean Energy Industry Report, which just released. We're really excited that this is now released. The link here is on your screen. I'm going to turn it back over to Carl, and then I'll be back in a few slides to talk more in detail about the job study that's being led by NYSERDA on behalf of the Just Transition Working Group.
Awesome. Thanks, Phil. Next slide, please. So I'm really going to set the stage, and then I'll let Phil walk through some of the key findings. So to pivot, our Clean Energy Industry Report is really a backward looking. It's an inventory of where we are now, and our job study really is a forward look. And so it's how do all these new investments play out in our economy? And it's built statutorily and handed to our Just Transition Working Group. So we've had a fantastic group of volunteers, ably led by Commissioner Reardon and President Harris. It's a diverse group representing both academics, labor, industry, some of the kind of key employers we have in the state, different voices to the table. And so, it's with great thanks that we've been able to work with this working group, and Phil and team have been able to iterate with them. In fact, this material is actually not new. So we presented to the Just Transition Working Group earlier in the month. And what we'll be doing is giving you all a more slimmed down summary of that work product. We'll be meeting with the group again, and we'll be meeting with them at the end of this week to talk about some of our secondary outputs. And so with that, let's dive into the work itself. Next slide. Okay, so just to frame up, what's our mission statement? And I'm hearing a little bit of background. I'm not sure if it's just me or if others can go on mute. That would be great. So in terms of what the Climate Act asks us to do, there are a few key points from the statute. So we are asked to develop a job study that looks at the number of jobs that are created to counter climate change, and specifically in the energy sector, building sector, transportation, and working lands. So those were the core areas that we focused our attention. We were also looked to have a projection of the inventory of jobs and look at what workforce disruption might occur due to transitions. And so that's the key part of the transition. So we're not just looking at the jobs that are created in the opportunity space, but also where we see displacement of jobs and how can we then use that information to have a just transition over these coming decades. Next slide. In order to really think about those job opportunities and how we can help folks to transition, we need to look at the workforce training needs. And so that will be an aspect, not today, but for our follow-on work with the work group, which will be part of our overall job study, and to look at opportunities not just writ large, but also for our disadvantaged communities. Next slide. So when we talk about the energy system, we break it up into two parts when we think about it. So there's electricity, and we have 11 subsectors we've looked at. We also look at fuel supply, and there are 5 subsectors. When we look at energy demand, we look at buildings, which we've split into 6 subsectors, and transportation, 5 subsectors. So we've been able to get fairly granular. Phil will be able to walk you through those when we look at the results, but it really allows us to focus in on those specific parts of the economy that are going through this transition, where both we see opportunities and where we need to give a helping hand in this transition. Next slide. We also worked with the U.S. Climate Alliance and recognized they were already embarking on a broader look at afforestation, reforestation, and manure management capture systems, and we're looking at the economic impacts of those. So what we've been able to do is leverage that work, which is inclusive of New York and granularly looks at New York State, but also looks at the region, looks at the other states in the Alliance. So that's a work product that will also be brought forward, and we'll incorporate it into our job study. Next slide. So just as a reminder, you've all seen this slide before. What's our base? Our basis is to look at scenario 2 and 3. Those are the 2 scenarios that we've analyzed that both achieve our goals and that we've got detailed look at the system and investments that are going to be needed. And it's really those investments that drive our jobs and drive our shift in jobs. Next slide. And so just as a reminder, what does that mean in terms of investment? So there are many commonalities across both scenarios. There's considerable investments in solar and wind. There's continued investment in transmission, distribution, and storage. We're investing in some new areas where we have not seen a lot in the past, such as hydrogen fueling stations. And then we've continued to see growing investments in our commercial and residential buildings. And so, where you see investments, you will see job growth. Some of the differences, which again shouldn't be surprising, we've seen more investments in low carbon fuels in our scenario 2. And then we saw greater investments in our grid and in the electrification of buildings and in transportation. And you'll see some of those differences playing out in the job opportunities. Again, I think what we've learned, and I think Phil will echo, is there are more commonalities between our 2 scenarios than there are differences. And so there is a general narrative of growth, which we want to put before you, and there's a general narrative of job displacement that we should also carefully think through. So with that, I'll turn the mic back to Phil. Hopefully this tag team breaks it up a little bit, so it's not just the Carl show. So Phil, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Carl. So, taking a step back, right, when we were thinking about the work stream here and the work that we're doing with the economic impact modeling, really what we're doing is we're taking a look at these climate-related activities in the scenarios, and we're translating that into the societal investments that are necessary to get there. We are, through literature review, discussion, lots of discussion, and reviewing of technical papers, we're generating assumptions on local content, so how much will be produced in New York versus other places, and then really thinking about the jobs and other economic indicators that are connected to that direct spending, right? So the investments that are made in order to deploy the necessary technologies to meet those goals, but also looking at the impacts to local supply chains, how those companies that are installing the measures, for example, are spending the money throughout the supply chain, and then the ripple effects of those investments. So when you have more people making more money and spending that money in the economy, that creates additional economic impact. So for any former economics majors in the room, right, this is direct, indirect, and induced impacts. We're looking across all three of these. We wanted to also look at the jobs that are going to grow, decline, or change. That's where we're really going to need to be thinking about across different industries and different occupations over time. What does the state need to do to prepare for that kind of growth, or any potential declines or jobs that will change, to make sure that we can support workers and companies in this transition? Next slide. So as Carl mentioned, the overall findings is a really very substantial increase in employment from the investments across both scenarios, where we'd be looking at least 211,000 jobs by 2030, which is a 60% increase, and 346,000 jobs through 2050. So that's really enormous job growth. When you look at the orange bar here, which is 2019, the blue bar is 2030, and the green bar is 2050. This is a rate that's more than double the annual growth rate from 2016 through 2020. And remember, New York is already one of the fastest growing clean energy states in the country. So this rate of growth is really, really dramatic. Again, almost 700,000 jobs by 2050 in the growth subsectors. Really, really tremendous growth. You can sort of see it on this slide that the displacement is much lower, and we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. But why don't we flip to the next slide, where we can look at where these jobs are going to be created. So again, this is the scenario 2 job creation. So this is the subsectoral breakdown, and you can see here in the green shading that more than half of the new jobs are in the buildings subsectors, with a lot of that work being in HVAC, but also shell being a really important aspect of this. We also see big growth in offshore wind, solar, other electricity generation, and then the electrification of transportation, right, as key areas. Next slide. So scenario 3 is obviously higher levels of investment. So there will be more growth overall by about 9,000 jobs total. And what we see here is, again, offshore wind is again one of the fastest growing subsectors, going from fewer than 1,000 jobs today to more than 15,000 by 2030. So that's really substantial job growth in that sector. Next slide. Now this is where we're talking about, and Carl was mentioning that not only do you have tremendous growth, that growth is significantly higher than the displacement. So we do find that there's displacement subsectors where there's decreases of 22,000 jobs by 2030, which is a 14% decrease in the workforce over that period of time. And 77,000 jobs through 2050. So obviously this is not a tiny number or a number that can be ignored, but certainly there are a few things to sort of think about in terms of context. One is right here in the headline, that for every job displaced, there are 10 new jobs being created under the scoping plan scenarios. And the second is that, of course, we're talking about a pretty long time horizon here of either 10 to 30 years, right? And so many people will be retiring, other people will be leaving for other reasons. There are voluntary separations that happen all the time. So really what we're estimating here is that it's 1 worker lost for every 7 current workers that will be largely offset, or could be largely offset, by retiring workers and other job transitions. So that's sort of the goal here, is to eliminate or reduce the number of people who would outright lose their job without a transition opportunity or hadn't done so voluntarily. Next slide. So that sort of leads us to the question of, what are these jobs that are lost? And, the key takeaway here is that in scenario 2, almost half of the jobs that we see lost are in conventional fueling stations. Or we say really more than a third, between a third and a half. Now, I did want to just note that there, as Carl mentioned, different sort of levels of uncertainty over time. One of the things that we just don't really know fully is what the charging infrastructure might look like for EVs. So if we end up in a situation where it's a very different kind of charging scenario, this could turn out somewhat differently, because remember, conventional fueling stations have a lot of employment that are really sort of related to retail activities, right, in a convenience store inside of a gas station. So if you end up charging your vehicle at a place that looks just like a gas station today, and people still go in and buy lottery tickets and ice cream cones, then then we may see a lot less displacement there. But certainly what we're seeing here is the fueling stations and then the conventional fuel industries, so petroleum and natural gas as the bigger decliners. Again, this is a pie chart similar to what we showed you before, but remember, this is about 1/10 of the size of in terms of the numbers of jobs lost compared to the numbers created. Next slide. So in scenario 3, again, which is moving away, faster move away from combustion, what we see is really a pretty similar scenario, just a higher displacement from conventional fueling stations, obviously with the lower reliance on liquid biofuels, and still really seeing the petroleum and natural gas as the next largest segments. Next slide. So this is, again, in scenario 2, where we look at the electricity sector. We thought this would be good to show you some of the detail that we have. Clearly, as you can see in the growth over the 2019 to 2040 period, that the most jobs will be added in the distribution of electricity and the solar subsectors. So that will add the most jobs, with offshore wind having the fastest rate of growth from a relational standpoint, going from the smallest to the largest. Next slide. Scenario 3, really what we see is just a greater increase in offshore wind and the hydrogen and biomass segments. So you can see offshore wind is even greater. Still pretty significant gains, obviously, in electricity distribution as well as solar. Next slide. So, buildings is an enormous element of this. As you saw from the earlier slides, in both scenarios, buildings represent a huge opportunity for new job creation. And these are the building subsectors. And this is now 2019 to 2030. And what you see are, the residential market really adding a tremendous number of jobs, looking at the residential shell and residential HVAC, as well as commercial HVAC. And critically, this does include, these HVAC categories obviously includes the air source heat pumps and ground source heat pumps. So when we look at electrification as its own category, just to be clear on this, because I think it could, just make sure everyone understands, the electrification of heating and cooling would fall into the HVAC components, whereas things like lighting, induction cooktops, etc., Energy Star appliances would go into that residential electrification. Next slide. So here's scenario 3, and again, as we saw in the pie chart, even more jobs in this scenario for the building sector, and same general takeaway, just significantly greater jobs in those shell and HVAC technologies in particular. And I'm seeing a lot of questions coming through, so I'm going to try to get through these next few slides here because I know we've got a lot on the agenda. So let's go to the next slide. So again, as we mentioned earlier, all of the sectors, so electricity, fuels, buildings, and transportation, will grow faster annually from 2021 through 2030 than it grew from 2016 to 2020. Again, this is especially important finding given the rate of growth we've already seen, as has been evidenced by the Clean Energy Industry Report that we've conducted with NYSERDA for the last 5 years. On a net basis, a 38% increase or at least 189,000 jobs across those 4 sectors on a net basis. You know, that's really, really a dramatic number. That's more than almost every state in the United States has currently in their clean energy workforce. So that's really a substantial number, and really demonstrates, you know, I think New York's opportunity here and leadership in its policy, in the policy arena. And then we also mentioned that through 2050, that employment continues to grow by at least 268,000 jobs on a net basis through 2050. So really, this is you know, substantial job growth. Next slide. So now we're going to just talk a little bit about some of the model sensitivities. This is what we're working on currently, and I mentioned one of these already, but basically, you know, one of the keys in all of this work is determining how much of the supply chain, how much of the manufacturing can be conducted in state. And so, if you look at sort of what was expected for, say, the offshore wind sector, if you looked at something maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I don't know that anyone necessarily would have foreseen what's happening at Coymans or the Port of Albany or downstate, all the activity that's happening throughout New York. And so what we're working on here is looking at how increases in in-state manufacturing across all of these technologies and industries could impact employment and the economy in New York. So really demonstrating the importance of that local content piece across the different scenarios. We also talked about the gas station closings and how changes to the assumptions around gas station closings would impact model outcomes. You know, again, you know, if you imagine a scenario where there's a battery swap instead of a charge, and there's a retail establishment, you go in just like charging your, refueling your vehicle now, then that would have a very big difference between, you know, going to, you know, everyone charging at home as an example, right? So those are 2. Let's go to the next slide. And then the workforce analyses. So this is really important part of the work that, again, is we're working on now. We'll be delivering very soon. So first is looking at a regional approach. So that's really looking across the economic landscape for not just the state as a whole, but also for 5 economic regions. And then really the qualitative assessment, thinking about those jobs that are declining or changing. Where is there an easier pathway for transition? Where does it make the most sense to look at transition? And this would look at both sort of growth and decline, but also the likeness of skill sets and geographic proximity. So how reasonable is that transition, and what will it take for that transition to occur? And then critically looking at sustainable wages and how prevailing wage policy could impact findings. So that would look at both the cost, right? What would the impact be in cost to increase a wage to a prevailing wage standard for those jobs that are not at that threshold? And then what that would do to the economy in terms of ripple effects for those additional wages. Next slide. The last 2 workforce analyses. So we have you know, certainly a better understanding of how underserved populations. I talked a little bit about the priority populations, so I won't run through the list again. But looking at those priority populations, underserved populations are impacted under each scenario, and how we might think about generating equitable economic activity across the state. And then how the occupational pathways will change the demand for skills and certificates, and all the other elements that we think about from a workforce development standpoint that can then help us to understand what kind of transition planning is needed to help facilitate that transition from a workforce development perspective. So with that, I think we have one more slide, and I think I hit the timing just right, hopefully. So we'll talk briefly about next steps. So we are continuing to seek feedback from the Just Transition Working Group. We have a meeting at the end of this week, as Carl mentioned, and we'll continue to solicit that feedback, complete the employment outputs modeling with the sensitivities and workforce analyses that I just discussed in the last couple of slides, and then get to the great work of publishing the job study report, which we're really excited about and on track for. And the team is working really hard on that. So we're very excited to be able to share that with you as soon as it's ready to go. So Carl, I hope 2:45
Yeah,
was
that's great.
inclusive of questions. So I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, no, that's perfect, Phil. So I think we've got a few minutes for any council members who have questions. So maybe as folks are getting themselves organized, and maybe Sarah can help with hands. I always seem to have trouble seeing them. Just one thing to be clear about, when I speak to investments, I want to make it clear we're not just talking about CapEx, so it's not just an upfront investment, but we are looking at all the investments over the life of a product. So operational work that needs to be done. So it really is it's the full job narrative across all these different technologies. So maybe with that, do we have any council members who have any questions?
So Carl, I'm seeing a few hands here. I'm not sure the order that they came up, but we've got Bob Howarth, Dennis Elsenbeck, Gavin Donahue, and Raya.
Okay, maybe we'll just go in that order. Bob, you want to go first?
Sure. Thank you, Carl, and thank you, Philip. A lot of great material. I'm really pleased to see the jobs outlook look as promising as it does. It doesn't surprise me, but it's good to have those numbers in there. One question, then I have a comment or two. I was surprised that the job growth isn't more between 2030 and 2050. There's a pretty rapid increase till 2030, and then I would expect all sorts of actions need to be taken after that would increase it more. So that's my question. But let me make a comment or two before you get to that. I drove yesterday to give a lecture in Syracuse, and I pushed my electric car to the closest limit I'd ever like to in terms of the recharging, and the 220 volts place that I hoped would work on the way didn't work, was out of service, etc. I must say that having a suite of 440 fast charging stations available in New York would make electric vehicles much more attractive, I think, broadly. And you mentioned the context of, if we took our current service stations that sell gasoline and diesel, what if we made those into 440 fast charging stations, and most of the retail jobs would still stay there. And I wonder if we shouldn't make a big push for that. My only other comment is, Carl, I'm delighted to see you're doing the sensitivity analysis on the ground source heat pumps, and I agree totally on the district heat pump argument as well. I'm a little concerned that we won't get your results until next month, which is when we also have to vote on the implementation plan. Is there any way to give us some preliminary information before that meeting? No, those are my comments and questions.
Yeah, I can take it back, Bob. It's certainly work in progress now. So we'll see if we can't get some of this out earlier and put it up on the website so those who are interested can see it prior.
I think it'd be great if you
I
could.
recognize that.
It plays into the overall capacity we need for storage, for peak time, winter generation. It actually probably plays into the jobs things as well too. It's ground source heat pumps, district heat systems are going to be more labor intensive than air source heat pumps probably.
Yeah, so we'll take it back, and I'll let you know. And then on your first question, Bob, about why is there such a large job growth early on and then feels like maybe not as much later, that's really about the inputs that were given to the team. So, what we're seeing is to hit 2030, there's just a massive level of investment in order to ramp up. And when we think about jobs, interestingly, it's not the absolute amount of capacity, it's the annual scale of change. And that's what's driving jobs. It's each year, how much are we deploying? So we're seeing a whole lot of activity, for example, in offshore wind in the next decade in order to get us on the path to that 9 gigawatts. And so what we're effectively saying is that the scale of investments are really starting faster than probably we even had expected 5 years ago. And that because of that, we're driving that job creation sooner. And then we're sustaining those jobs over time as we retrofit more homes and as we build and deploy more solar panels. But what we're doing is we're front loading because of the rigor that we've had to engage in to hit 40 by 30. We've had to engage in that uptick in jobs earlier.
Okay. And I would just add as well that in many of the studies that you'll see that do conduct input-output modeling, there's sort of a job years number that gets thrown out for the entire period of time. And you say, you know, by 2050, there'll be 8 billion job years or whatever people say, that we don't think has as much value. Here we really looked at on an annual basis how many people will be needed to work in the sector in order to get things done. So you can imagine, right, instead of saying, well, we're going to have 100,000 people 2030 and then they're all going to lose their job and then there's going to be a new 100,000 people coming in, we look at that as a continuum, right? So those people who are working in 2030 are continuing on if they're still on that number in our analysis. So it really is sort of a much more of a real jobs number than what you sometimes see in these analyses.
No, it's extremely useful
that's
to
a
see
great
that.
point.
And you know, again, I was surprised by the rate short term versus longer term, but that's important for us to know and for everyone to know as we're acting. So thank you for that.
Yeah, Phil, and that's a great point about job years. I think that can be confusing and misused, and we do not look at cumulative job years. We feel like that's a misleading metric that can make it look like, you know, we are re-employing our entire state. Yeah. All right. I might have lost track, but maybe Dennis was next.
Thanks, Carl and Phil. Appreciate it. There's not enough detail in here for kind of like me to make a real opinion on this. Numbers of jobs, there's an apple I can pick as well. What portion of them are manufacturing and service? Because there's a bigger, in my humble opinion, a higher value proposition if they're into manufacturing, especially if we can align them with our disadvantaged communities so that we're bringing the jobs to the community versus all of these social issues of trying to get individuals from their community to these jobs outside. And I know, Carl, I'm a broken record on this, but this idea of setting up New York as a global leader, in my opinion, has more to do with manufacturing than service jobs. I mean, I'm not downplaying service jobs; they're needed in order to do this, but I really would like to see more of an emphasis on the manufacturing side, and then engaging ESD, the local economic development councils, regional economic development councils. I think it aligns better with smart growth, disadvantaged communities. It's just an opinion that I have. And I know you said the distribution system investment will be the largest growth. I'm not sure that's a good thing or a bad thing, to be quite honest with you. You know, we're creating that because of decarbonization, but can I tell you, a lot of that investment should happen anyway, regardless of the Climate Act. Our systems are old. We have spot load growth that's required to think about in terms of economic development activity. So long story short, or maybe kind of like an assessment of, you know, what's your proposition in terms of manufacturing versus service within those numbers. And I'd feel a little bit more comfortable about the direction that this study is taking.
Yeah, so Dennis, thanks for those questions. You know, I'll field them each part, and then Phil, you can add as you have other details. So in terms of the greater breakdown, it's actually one of my favorite questions, right? Give me more. So we did publish with the Just Transition Working Group over 200 slides that actually gives a breakdown for all, you know, 15 of the subsectors, what's manufacturing, what's service. So it's all on the website now. I'll send it to you afterwards, Dennis, so that you can have it in your inbox. And then the job study will put words around that. You know, 200 slides, it's kind of hard to chew through. So the actual job study will kind of take it piece by piece. But all of those metrics are there. Certainly, Phil, if you have any off-the-cuff answers, but I think we'll get you all those details, Dennis. Just to make sure we're clear on what we think about distribution jobs, obviously the grid needs to grow. As you say, and as I hope I emphasized last time, we're going to be investing over $100 billion in our energy system, business as usual, right? And so some of that growth is going to be happening anyway. in the sense of if we do our job right, we're going to have to keep our distribution jobs going. It's not the largest growth area. You'll just note that it's already a fairly large employer when you look across each of the sectors. And so on a relative scale, it's actually not growing. It's growing less than buildings and growing less than offshore wind. But because it was at such a large starting point, it has the kind of largest total job count when we look out into the future. So it's both where it is now and then what we need the grid to be in the future. So we do think, and those are good jobs, right? Those are local jobs that folks can use with who are going to be able to keep our grid growing over time. So I think those were two of the larger fronts. Dennis, did I hit each of the pieces? Oh, and then also the manufacturing. So this I might disappoint a bit. I think we're going to get at the opportunity space for manufacturing and kind of insourcing more instead of outsourcing in order to feed our needs. What the job study doesn't do, it's not the remit of the Climate Act. It doesn't look at the global opportunity space for us to be then an export leader. But that's a great question to ask and one that we will be exploring over time. So I think we'll be able to pivot from this base analysis that says, what are our needs for our transition? What if we can self-supply that more? Then we become a hub that can consider how we're exporting, right? So I think that will need to be a follow-on phase. But Phil, any other thoughts there?
Yeah, and Carl, I want to just remind everyone we have just a few minutes to wrap up questions. Thank you. Sorry,
okay.
Going to be the heavy today.
Yeah, I'll cut you off, Phil, and I'll say, Dennis, we're going to get back to you.
Thanks, Carl.
So maybe just to give, Gavin, I think you were next.
Just a couple of things. I appreciate the info, like a lot of us. I want to build upon maybe Dennis's point. The model sensitivity runs. Is there anything that is being done about non-energy manufacturing and job loss and employment in New York as a result of increased energy costs? Because there is going to be an impact on that side of the job equation. That's one question. The second one is going back to jobs lost. In this maybe a 2A and 2B slide, it talks about nuclear jobs being lost. And as I recall, the draft scoping plan has a commitment to existing nuclear. So is that for 2029 and beyond? It's a question mark. Is that why you put jobs lost in the nuclear field?
Great. Yeah, I think I can address those quickly, and then Gavin, happy to follow up. So on the nuclear front, it's really an anomaly of the base year. So 2019 was the base year, and we're going to see some job loss because of Indian Point. So that's really what you're seeing there. It's the Indian Point. So it's really not about our transition. It's just having 2019 as a base year means that we are seeing some of those jobs lost.
Okay. The next thing is,
and I understand that. Yeah, go ahead.
In the interest of time, though, we're talking about a decrease of use of natural gas, right, as a state. And I get that, but I didn't see a job impact and changes in other industries like agriculture, farming. There has to be an impact in those sectors if we're having impacts in other sectors. So that's a question maybe we can answer later, but it's an omission on your part, I think, or on the study's part. And then the other term that we keep making is investments made. What does that mean? Is that investments made? Who's doing the analysis, and where's the money coming from investments made? And what's the impact on the people that have to make those investments? So that in a nutshell are my comments on this. And I'd like to hear more.
Yeah, so maybe I'll just touch upon that last one, and then I'd be happy to follow up on those other threads, maybe at our next meeting or in between meetings. So the investments are being driven out of the work that E3 did for us. So those detailed scenarios that I showed over the last couple of meetings, where we said this is the level of investment that's going to be necessary to get these EVs on the street, to get homes retrofitted, to get solar panels built. We look literally at what are the dollars that are being spent to make those happen. And as Phil said, how much of that drives in-state activity versus out-of-state. And then we look at directly from those investments what's driving those jobs. So it directly correlates back to all the numbers that I presented last meeting, but happy to kind of connect those dots for you separately. So maybe I think I had Raya on my list. I think we've got at least one more minute, so love to hear your question.
Yes, thank you. Can folks hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, thank you. Apologies, I've had some tech difficulties, so I'm not on video. So thank you very much. Very interested to see, to see this in more detail. Just my top level question is, in priority communities, is there a gender focus? Is it, or in addition to other factors, is gender a focus? And to the extent there's data, gender expression, can we, do the priority population numbers track the disadvantaged communities definition or work that's happening? I think that's my specific question. And then when do we think we will see this, and how can we ensure that it's represented in the final plan?
Yeah, so maybe Phil, you want to speak both to the CEIR and then any demographic work that we do around gender and some of the other breakdown?
Sure. Yes. So in the CEIR, we track gender as well as a number of other demographic categories. The challenge is that is an employer survey, not an individual survey. So in an individual survey, it's very easy to ask a person, what the gender to which they identify. In an employer survey, you're asking an employer to make a broad sort of classification about the demographics of their existing workforce. Mm-hmm. So it's a little bit hard to get both sort of granular data about people's own, how people identify, as opposed to sort of how they are identified, I suppose you'd have to say, by the person, by the employer. And secondly, it's very hard to get sort of the intersectional questions, because it would lead to a very difficult and unruly questionnaire when you're asking someone to put people into lots of different categories in multiple different ways. So that is a bit of an issue. However, we did do a deep dive this year in some of the priority populations, and we are continuing to do additional work in that category to refine that to get to those types of questions on the annual tracker. In terms of the outputs that we're conducting for this job study that we've been talking about for the future, there's a couple of ways I think it can be useful from a demographic standpoint. One is we're looking at the occupations that are most impacted, and we will be looking at the current makeup of the gender of those positions, so that we at least know the baseline of what we're working with today. Then we are looking at the disadvantaged communities, but that really doesn't have a gender component from the analysis that I've looked at, because this is a community-based level, right? So when we're looking at a geographic location or census tracts or neighborhoods, we're looking at things like an EJ lens, or we're looking at the overall demographics of a community, right, at a community level where jobs might be created. Like at the census tract kind of analysis, we're not going to have data that's going to be significant around gender issues. So really what we'd be looking at is that occupational piece to understand where are the occupations that are going to be, where there's going to be the most job creation, where there are significant gaps. There are many, I can tell you that already. There are many gaps in terms of gender participation in those occupations. And then we certainly will be thinking about how to address those types of gaps. But when we look at a geographic or spatial analysis, that is, gender is not an element that we're able to discern out with any specificity from the geographic or spatial data that we get.
So you can get race, but not gender?
Well, we can get gender. It's just that, you'd have to find essentially neighborhoods where there's a disproportionate number of women versus men, right? Or other sort of gender demographics. So you can get it, but you can't get any sort of significant detail about community level data that is where there are larger and statistically significant disparities.
All right. So
right. Yeah.
So dig in here, and I know we don't have a lot of time. Are women and girls a priority population for the purpose of the job study? I think is a question. And of course, more broadly, as we know, women and girls are disproportionately impacted by climate change and on the front line of climate change in every instance. And so I'd love to see us figure out how that lens can be put onto the disadvantaged communities piece. And it would be great if we could get an update on the disadvantaged opportunities piece for the next meeting, but for the purposes of the job study, are women and girls a priority population? And I'm hearing that you are accounting for, or you will be able to account for, disparities in particular workforces as well.
Right. So from a workforce perspective, sorry, Carl, go ahead.
No, I think we're short on time, but Raya, I'd love to follow up with you. I'm going to send you the CEIR, which I think you'll find be really interesting. It does look at gender and look at other demographic issues right now, and it's a stark picture. I think what you're saying is right, and the data shows it. And to me, that gives us the impetus for the just transition to think about gender as through one of our lenses. So let us follow up. And I know that we are trying to keep moving. So
yes,
Sarah, are
Carl,
we moving on, or?
Carl,
Yeah.
I'm sorry to say, we're going to have to cut this topic off now. I very rarely do that, but frankly, we just have a lot to cover in the next section, and I really, really want to give time for the members' feedback. So what I would ask is, if we didn't get to you, if you could just reach out to Carl directly. I'll nominate you, Carl, to handle questions that may exist, and to the extent that we need to provide an update during our next meeting, that would be great. So let's move on, folks. But I do want to thank both you and Phil for the great presentation and the great work. Okay, so if we could turn to the next slide, please. For the next portion of the meeting, this is where Sarah Osgood is going to facilitate a presentation and discussion of the council member feedback that was received on the initial draft scoping plan, and provide proposed resolutions for that feedback. So I, for one, and I'm sure I'm joined by all of you, found the draft to be an impressive piece of work, and would like to acknowledge and thank the work of the advisory panels of the Climate Justice Working Group and the staff that have contributed to what was an incredibly impressive initial draft that was shared for review. I very much appreciate the effort and dedication from those that have supported this process, and to each of the members for their valued feedback. It was a long read, I will admit it, but thank you for your feedback, which we'll be discussing today. I do understand the staff received a lot of good feedback on how to improve on that initial draft, which is great, but it also means we have a lot to cover in a relatively short amount of time here today. So here's the plan. To ensure that we're able to get through all of the feedback and allow ample time for council discussion on topics of greatest interest, we're going to run through a presentation of the feedback and the proposed resolutions within the next hour, and then circle back to discuss the topics members prioritize in the last hour of the meeting. So please follow closely and get those priority lists together, as Sarah will instruct you now. So I'll hand it over to Sarah to give additional details on that process before jumping into the substance of the feedback. So over to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Doreen. So that's correct. As if we could go to the next slide, please. As you're all aware, the council is required to issue a draft scoping plan for public comment by January 1st of the coming year. And so just so you know what to expect, we will be conducting a vote on release of the draft scoping plan at the December meeting. While the issuance of the final scoping plan requires a supermajority of 15 members or more, the bylaws dictate that for other decisions and actions, it's only required a simple majority of 12 members for approval. And so we're going to be structuring the vote at the December meeting to be on whether the draft should be released for public comment. It would not be an indication of endorsement of any or all of the strategies that are contained in the draft. And this will allow the council time to discuss and deliberate on the material contained in the draft, to consider public comments that come in over next year as it works to a final scoping plan at the end of 22. So given this approach, what we're asking for are suggested improvements to the draft that would help get members comfortable with issuing the plan for public comment. So this might be along the lines of, is it representative of the work that has come before the council? Is the material objectively presented? We'll walk through the feedback, starting with general feedback, and then we'll get into specific topics that are roughly organized by the level of feedback that we received from council members. And as Doreen said, we'll then loop back to discuss the items where council members feel that they'd like to further discuss any of the feedback or the proposed resolution. And to do this, what we're asking is council members in real time would put in the chat just a statement to say discuss, and then either the slide number or the topic, and we'll have staff monitoring responses as we go, and we'll loop back to the items with the greatest interest. What we've tried to do in presenting this is dividing the feedback into key points to incorporate, which is more of the straightforward or what staff saw as non-controversial feedback that just makes sense to include in the revision. And then we have that followed by unresolved issues that might be, they would fall outside of that category, so they might not be as straightforward. They could be controversial. And for each of those unresolved issues, staff has identified a proposed resolution. So moving on to the next slide, we'll get into some of the general feedback. So just overall on the, some of this is on the upfront sections where we're kind of setting the stage for a lot of the strategies, but we were asked to really tout what New York has done a little bit more, show New York's climate leadership, provide more state examples of the need to take action. We had a lot in there on kind of the international reasons and justifications, and we've got really good feedback to say, let's make that a little bit more New York State specific. While we did have workforce development and job creation as kind of one of the pillars of the plan, we've got feedback that that needs to be beefed up a little bit and more strongly represented. That there's a need for more clarity on the process and how we got to the scoping plan, this draft scoping plan, how where the input has come from, and what the process would be going forward. Also that we need to think a little bit more about the economic development opportunities of the actions and kind of take a perspective as rather than having to pay for these things, we're looking at investing in climate change that will position climate change solutions that positions New York as a supplier in this new world, and really sets New York up to reap some of the benefits that that we believe are to come from these actions. There's also a little bit of outdated text when we pulled from the advisory panel recommendations, since they've been delivered to the council in, I think it was the April and May timeframe of earlier this year. So we've got a little bit of updating that needs to do to just reflect some more recent actions that have been taken. And we've also been asked to obviously include the job study information, which we intend to do, and provide a little bit more of a distilled summary up front of key information and priority recommendations to really help set the stage for kind of regardless of the scenario that is ultimately chosen as a pathway forward, we're talking about largely the same magnitude of action. And so let's kind of spell that out a little bit more clearly. Next slide, please. Some unresolved issues and proposed resolutions here. So we've been asked to better integrate the climate justice working feedback rather than merely stating what the feedback is. We tried to better integrate it where we could. However, there were some pieces of feedback where the climate justice working group maybe suggested to take an item off the table, or and for these, we felt that it kind of took the step beyond staff making the call as to make that change, and we believe that the council should have an opportunity to discuss some of that feedback prior to just following it without discussion. And so the next piece of unresolved feedback was a request for an analysis on the energy affordability and the impacts to consumer pricing as part of the scoping plan scenarios. And while obviously we understand kind of the importance of this, this does go beyond the scope of the integration analysis in terms of identifying the who pays aspect. And so for getting down to the specific ratepayer cost impacts of actions, we would anticipate that analysis would be developed as part of the implementation process of the policies. There were also a number of comments stating support or lack of support and requesting that we remove specific actions or strategies. Again, this was a place where there was a little bit of conflicting feedback from the council in terms of which ones to take out or leave in. And so again, we're suggesting that this requires additional council discussion to work towards a consensus position. And so our suggestion would be to not incorporate any suggested removals of strategies within the current draft. But what we would do is at the December meeting, when there is a vote being taken, we would allow members to make, a statement to say, what they do support or don't support or would like to see more of. And then finally, in terms of the general feedback, there was the question of how much renewable energy capacity or storage would be required if ground source heat pumps were used instead of air source heat pumps in the analysis. And Carl touched upon this earlier, but just to reiterate and capture it here, this is being examined as a sensitivity to the integration analysis, and the results would be included in the revised draft scoping plan that we'd get back around to members. And so with that, I will move to the next slide here. And I think for this, we're a little bit shy on staff that work directly on a lot of this. We had one person in particular who went out on maternity leave, so congratulations to her. We'll do our best to cover this. So if we go to the next slide, please. We have in each of these, we'll have a slide that kind of talks about the highlights of the chapter. Here, just wanted to pull in because I know there were serious concerns raised about the gas system transition chapter. So just wanted to make it clear. And sorry if I can just pause. I see that on the slide it's saying a computer needs to be restarted. If we can push that out of the way and hopefully not restart in the middle of this, that would be great. Thank you. And so really what we know is that the gas system will be very different in 2050, and that we need a very well planned transition of the gas system to ensure that the transition is equitable, that it's cost effective, and that it doesn't compromise reliability and safety. And why we pulled this out as a standalone chapter was really that there were pieces of it that were considered in multiple advisory panels, but it felt like the gas transition issue is such a big issue that we should probably devote its own chapter to it. I recognize that it probably did not have as quite the level of detail or level of sophistication, for lack of a better word. And there are changes that that we can implement here. So if we can go on to the next slide. And then I think maybe even one more beyond that. Yep, one more slide, please. Slide 59. So just trying to hit on the key points to incorporate. We heard good suggestions that we need to have more information about what the existing laws require and in some cases limit what regulators can do to make decisions that are consistent with the Climate Act. So just trying to kind of tee up the issues as realistically as possible. We had key stakeholders where we were missing the important power plant owner as a key stakeholder, so we'll add that. We were asked to make stronger ties to kind of the criticality of new building codes to limit gas, and also to provide a little bit better of a sense of the scale and scope of what's needed in terms of building conversions to meet these goals. And also recommended that we ensure the gas system is included in the reliability needs assessment. In terms of unresolved issues, we did hear, how do we, this might be putting it a little bit overly nice, I will say, how do we balance the decommissioning, the leak detection, decarbonization within the scoping plan and the gas sector? There were concerns that, we heard from some members that we leaned in too far towards decommissioning. We heard from other members that we didn't lean in far enough. And so what we're planning to do in this chapter is to emphasize that we need a well-planned and strategic decommissioning to protect consumers and address resiliency concerns. I think the issue of the level of decarbonization or decommissioning is ripe for further council discussion in 2022. But what we're suggesting is we get a little bit more specific when we talk about, for instance, the potential of any low carbon fuels for difficult to electrify sectors, that we're being really specific about what we mean there. And so I think a good example could be the New York City topology, the steam system there. How do we, there are options, there are choices to take, and that seems like it's appropriate for the council to discuss in 2022. Next slide, please. Onto the electricity chapter, which I will cover as well. And if we can jump forward to the key points to incorporate. So here we were asked to say more about where some of the information came from. So the firm and dispatchable generation resources that are needed for reliability, how the state is going to be handling compliance with Section 7 of the Climate Act, how does existing renewable generation fit into the state's generation mix, understanding how we got to the estimated load growth of 60 to 85% by 2050. A lot of these are falling into the area of we need greater clarity in this area, and I think they make complete sense, and we're prepared to incorporate them into the draft assuming the council members are comfortable with that. Also looking at reliability from the consumer side and in terms of preparedness, and looking at the potential, like noting that battery storage goes beyond just, or energy storage goes beyond just battery storage and includes other forms of electric and thermal storage. And also the energy storage can be used to manage load utilization and mitigate distribution system upgrades. Next slide, please. So some of the unresolved issues that we saw on electricity was the treatment of nuclear facilities. So there was a question of if we were saying that the nuclear facilities where the RECs are up in 2029, and the suggestion from the advisory panel said that prior to that time, there needs to be an analysis as to whether that support is needed to continue. There was a question of, well, if we're having that, then we're not capturing the full costs in the integration analysis. However, I understand from discussing with the integration analysis team that the integration analysis does include the relicensing of the nuclear facilities as part of its resource cost assessment. And there are sensitivities to looking at what happens if the facilities are not relicensed. The treatment of hydrogen, this was another one that was that got a lot of feedback on. Tying, and so we got the feedback here was kind of coming in both directions, that we could lean in more and that we leaned in too much. And so here, what we're suggesting we do is tie more closely to the analysis work. And when we're talking about a potential use of hydrogen or another clean fuel going into the future, that we're really specific about the scale that we're talking about, because in any case, I think it's quite limited. And so just trying to be a little bit more clear on that. There was also a recommendation to consider a mandate that renewable gas could only be used in non-distributed, non-combustion end uses, such as fuel cell energy generation. This staff falls into the category of requiring council discussion on this. And then finally, on electricity, there was a question about considering dual fuel heating solutions that combine gas and electric heating sources as possible solutions to mitigate the winter peak demand impacts. Again, we feel that this falls into the category of requiring additional council discussion before implementing. And so that covers electricity. I am now going to turn it over to Vanessa Ulmer to cover the buildings sector.
Great, thanks, Sarah. So thank you for the great feedback that we received on the buildings chapter. So I'll kick off by discussing, next slide, please, discussing the items that, and one more, the staff team teed up as straightforward, although oftentimes, critical and nuanced key points to incorporate, but non-controversial, put it that way. So we certainly are eager to place more emphasis on the good news from the job study, to recognizing how building decarbonization and the innovation in this space can lead to jobs. We'll also place more emphasis on resiliency, especially related to heating. We propose expanding attention to community scale district thermal solutions, and relatedly, and intersecting with the gas system transition, exploring how the build out of heat pumps could be done in a managed and strategic way. So if you had a neighborhood by neighborhood approach to heat pump adoption, you could capture economies of scale and also enable coordination with a managed transition of the gas system. The current draft includes a proposal that the Public Service Commission should prohibit utilities from providing new gas service to existing buildings, and that's intended to be kind of a counterpart proposal to code that would prohibit, by a date certain, a future date certain, gas service for new construction. And so we have a recommendation to identify how this information, both for existing buildings and new buildings, could be shared with decision makers in municipal planning departments. We got the good input to expand discussion of the pros and cons of different funding options to scale up public financial incentives for heat pump adoption, energy efficiency, and building decarbonization, and recognizing that federal funding really seems critical in this space. However, levels are uncertain. So to reflect kind of different options and the uncertainty in the draft scoping plan. There are a couple of specific recommendations for kind of additional recommendations to add to the buildings chapter. So one of those was to include a specific recommendation that the state should establish a 2030 target for the building sector that's commensurate with the level of electrification and efficiency needed to achieve the state's climate goals, which, as we see in the integration analysis, is very ambitious indeed by 2030, and then ensure that policies and programs are in place to achieve the target. Also, a recommendation that building codes are expanded to accommodate increased levels of battery storage, as well as where storage is installed in a manner that provides capability at the point of end use, so that we're accommodating the move towards EV charging and electric heating and cooling. Then there's some clarification issues, which are certainly important. So explaining the composition of fossil fuels used in buildings that account for the sector's emissions from combustion, providing specifics on how to electrify large buildings, as well as how district steam plays into this solution. So again, district steam is usually used for large buildings. Downstate, that would be the Con Ed steam system. And then when we're talking about the linkage between fossil gas, particularly used for cooking, but and indoor air quality and how that can impact human health, to be precise with that connection and to cite peer-reviewed research. So those are the key points we propose incorporating with the council's feedback. Next slide, please. And then in terms of the issues we tagged as unresolved. So again, there's a question about a dual fuel path, for example, in a scenario analysis, which would use hybrid heating systems and the existing gas infrastructure with electrification, but with less electrification, given those hybrid heating systems, which would be dual electrified and gas. And what about a scenario like that would be more comparable to what is part of the New York City pathway study? So as Sarah alluded to, this is something that we're proposing for additional council discussion in 2022. But in this draft, we certainly can clarify the integration analysis scenarios that were done to date for New York State and certain constraints with respect to our scenarios. So in sum, even with significant deployment of renewable natural gas in the building sector, in our emissions accounting, renewable natural gas still does count towards emissions. So it's not a zero emissions fuel. So there's some limitations in terms of, the need to mitigate statewide emissions across sectors. And then green hydrogen is a zero emissions fuel, but the highest value allocation of hydrogen is mostly occurring in the transportation and industrial and for electricity reliability. There is some hydrogen that's allocated in the building sector to the Con Ed district steam system, so that's something that we'll talk about. And then we can also talk about, and again, this is kind of in the context of transition strategy and large buildings, as well as the very, very cold areas of our state, opportunities for resource efficient electrification, where a large building may have a heat pump and a fuel source that can kind of be deployed strategically as a transition strategy. So secondly, and we've touched on this a couple of times already this meeting, is a recommendation that ground source heat pumps and community thermal loops are, be kind of prioritized versus air source heat pumps, given that air source heat pumps do lose efficiency when it gets very cold and then have increased impacts on our electric grid. So again, we have a ground source district heat pump sensitivity analysis underway, which we will incorporate. I also would point out here that given the speed and scale of the transition towards building electrification that we have on the table, it's likely that it suggests a mix of heat pump solutions would be appropriate, and that would be appropriate, allow buildings to kind of pick a solution that works for the building as well. And then thirdly, a call for more consideration of the distribution and the demand side, and thinking about how we can really have integrated system solutions where heat pumps are integrated with the advanced metering infrastructure that's coming online for more and more of our electric customers, time of use rates, and energy storage. And how do we think about these integrated solutions in a way that minimizes the need for infrastructure upgrades on our electric grid? So here, the Buildings chapter does recognize the importance of advancing flexible and grid interactive customer demand in the building sector, including through battery and thermal storage and price signals that will, encourage customers to be good grid citizens. Right now, we have that primarily in a recommendation under supporting innovation next generation grid interactive building solutions, in part because the price signals aren't really developed. So we have some technology, we can continue to innovate technology, and then we need to innovate the business model concurrently, but certainly agree that the narrative description can be expanded with respect to the importance of the flexible and grid interactive buildings demands. It's likely would not be possible for this draft, however, to kind of fully quantify the cost to consumers versus the grid infrastructure. So I will stop there and pass the mic. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Vanessa. If we can go to the next chapter on transportation, I'll hand this over to Jared Snyder from DEC to walk us through.
Right. Thanks, Sarah. And could we skip ahead? I think 2 slides. There we go. So most of the feedback we've received related to the electrification strategies, the strategies to move to zero-emission vehicles as expeditiously as possible. One of them was a recommendation that we add a commitment for the state fleet to be zero emission by a date certain. And, you know, New York, in fact, joined a number of other jurisdictions at the Glasgow conference to make such a commitment. So we will reference that. That would be a 100% light-duty fleet by 2035 and medium-heavy duty for appropriate uses by 2040. Another comment was more emphasis on off-road vehicles. That the governor signed legislation in September with the goal of electrifying or zero-emission off-road vehicles by 2035. So we'll make sure that's referenced. The importance of educating the public about electric vehicles, and also, you know, the interaction of electric vehicles with the grid, with energy storage, with the distribution grid. Another comment that we will incorporate is emphasizing more the need for different types of charging infrastructure, particularly highway-based fast charging and charging in multifamily homes in urban areas. I think that was already there, but we'll make sure that that's called out in more detail. And there was a comment about revising language about ZEV cost effectiveness to be more up-to-date, less pessimistic, and we'll certainly take a look at that comment. Next slide, please. So I'd say the key unresolved issue about which there are some competing views is the role of low-carbon fuels. As currently crafted, you know, we have the 2 scenarios. Scenario 2 has limited reliance on low-carbon fuels for those hard-to-electrify uses. You know, think about, you know, we're going to be moving very expeditiously towards electrifying cars and trucks, but they will, you know, internal combustion engines will still be on the road for a couple of decades. Is there a benefit to using low-carbon fuels in those applications? Meanwhile, scenario 3 has extremely little role for renewable fuels, and so I think we're seeking direction from council members about whether the approach of going out with both scenarios for public comment and leaving this as a topic to be decided in 2022 after getting that public comment. Is there support for that approach? So that's the one unresolved issue. The second unresolved issue was a comment about utilities owning distributed charging stations. You know, the state as a whole does not see evidence of a market failure or a benefit of utility ownership, but we welcome evidence to suggest that issue should be revisited. And I'll note that the Public Service Commission is planning to review this matter in its 2023 midterm review of the Make Ready program. So that will be coming up a little over a year from now. So that's all I got for now.
Thanks, Jared. If we could go to the next slide and turn it over to Vince Ravashir from Empire State Development to walk us through industry.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. And if you could move 2 slides forward, please. So we also got a number of key points to incorporate in the feedback. The first several of these are fairly straightforward, and our proposed resolution, frankly, is simply to make reference to them in the text and to place more emphasis on them. So the first one was simply to identify the key stakeholders consistent with the format used in the other chapters. The other chapters were a little more consistent than we had been in mentioning specific state agencies and U.S. agencies. The second point was to provide additional emphasis on the need to focus investments and their benefits in disadvantaged communities, as well as the importance of doing so. And we are proposing, again, to incorporate language that makes that point, and the point that investments can be prioritized to target industries that will have the greatest impact on those communities. The third point, again, very straightforward, to simply not overlook the need to retain clean energy industries that may already be located in the state. ESD already has an effort in terms of industry retention in addition to attraction and expansion, and so we'll certainly propose going ahead and referencing retention. And then the third point was about recommending adding guidelines on how certain lower emission technology should be pursued or incentivized. The industry chapter had simply noted that because we were going to need some technological advancement in order to meet the 2050 goals, we would need a robust RD&D agenda. And so there was a bit of a cart before the horse aspect to that, because before engaging in the RD&D agenda, presumably you don't necessarily know exactly what guidelines and what sort of criteria you should be using to identify technologies that look promising. But we've developed some language, some proposed language that says, in effect, that research should also determine guidelines that dictate which solutions should be incentivized and the manner in which they should be deployed. These guidelines should be set to ensure that solutions are pursued only if they meet benchmarks for environmental justice and equity, as well as for economic and technical scalability. The next two require just a little bit of explanation, though they're not very complicated. A comment was made about there being a reference to the use of carbon capture with respect to cement manufacturing, but not with respect to other industries. This was actually with regard to text outside of the industry chapter, and was just not explicit enough in noting that cement manufacturing was simply being cited as an example of an industry that might conceivably be appropriate for carbon capture at some point, and it wasn't a recommendation to that effect. So the proposed solution is to simply highlight that more clearly as an example. And then we were also asked to address cryptocurrency mining and similar activities. And here we're proposing adding a chapter, a new paragraph that's a separate section entitled Other Energy and Emission Intensive Industries. Obviously, with the sort of time horizon we have, we need to allow for the possibility that there may be other industries other than cryptocurrency mining that actually are large emitters or large users of energy and need to be able to react to the development of those industries to the extent that they may be interfering with the ability to meet our greenhouse gas reduction goals. And so the bottom line in that proposed language was that the state should monitor and evaluate emerging industries and develop policy responses needed to ensure that they do not interfere with meeting statewide emission limits or other CLCPA requirements. Next slide, please. And here we had two unresolved issues. The first was about whether DEC should exercise the authority was given in the CLCPA to establish an alternative compliance option for particular industries that may need that option to achieve emission reductions through local offsets. Here, there wasn't really or hasn't been clear guidance from the council as to whether or not that's something that DEC should or should not do. So we only went as far as some language that proposed that in some limited instances, industrial sources might be able to qualify for the use of an alternative compliance mechanism if DEC has established the mechanism and if the source can meet the stringent requirements that are set out for these mechanisms in the CLCPA. And then the second and last unresolved issue was about providing manufacturing companies with some comfort that they should still be investing in New York State, even if they are still relying on fossil fuels. And here we would just observe that the specific strategies that are set out in the industry chapter really should give industry that sort of comfort, because we mentioned the possible use of low carbon fuels, carbon capture, the alternative compliance mechanism as ways to be sensitive to the fact that these industries may need to utilize these mechanisms in hitting the emission reductions, and to be conscious at the same time of the possibility of leakage and resulting as a result of them not having some of these alternatives available. And so the only language suggestion we made is to just simply highlight at the outset of the chapter the fact that the industry recommendations are, in fact, primarily incentive-based. And that's all I have, Sarah.
I think Sarah might have just been muted.
I was muted that whole time, wasn't I?
Oh.
Sorry. Thank you. Brian Ellis and Brian Steinmuller, I'd like to turn it over to you to walk us through the Ag and Forestry chapter. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate it, and happy birthday. Next slide, please. Well, great. Thank you so much. So key points to incorporate in the Agriculture and Forestry chapter. And again, Brian Ellis is also with me, so he can help to address any forestry-related questions later on or discussions. But just to get right into it, as we already talked about, as Jared mentioned for the transportation chapter, a note on ag equipment, specifically tractors and other types of equipment, would be covered in the transportation chapter under off-road vehicles. So we will clarify this up front in the introduction to our Ag and Forestry chapter, so we're clear on the ag emissions that we are recommending management for. Second was to ensure consistent treatment of biofuel combustion. Of course, this is something that would all be a recommendation across multiple chapters. So we certainly will work with Sarah and the lead scoping plan team to ensure that we're being consistent in our language referring to biofuels and biofuel combustion. It was pointed out that many of the proposals here are already being worked on by agencies, and programs are already currently underway that have an impact on our proposed recommendations. So there's a need to be more specific about the scale of change, the scope, and funding for the specifics in order to meet the lasting carbon sequestration and emission impacts. So we will be more clear on that as well, and be more specific on the scale, scope, and needs for meeting our intended recommendation goals. We also, it was noted that should recommend expanding forest management programs specifically for smaller holdings, smaller forests, and shifting focus, not just from a harvest scenario, but also to forest sequestration. And I believe we can clarify that and ensure that that is well addressed in the recommendations to establish a 480B and 480C type program for smaller forest parcels. Finally, we also should emphasize the link between nutrient management and water quality, especially the impact of nutrient pollution on New York's watersheds, and also discuss more clearly the overlapping practices for sequestration, soil health, and pollution prevention. So we will take a look at the applicable sections again to ensure that those links are clear and the interactions between soil health for sequestration, soil health for adaptation and pollution prevention, as well as nutrient management, are integrated to the extent that we can. Next slide, please. And finally, for unresolved issues, there was a recommendation, or there was a comment that we should recommend providing funding to measure methane emissions from New York State farms. And a proposed resolution here is to clarify one of our strategies or recommended strategies, AF15 specifically, which is the monitoring and benchmarking for ag greenhouse gas emissions. The first component of that strategy really does call for the establishment of funding for an agricultural benchmark and monitoring program. So the intent here is to provide funding to farms and also potentially other service providers to collect data where feasible, to measure emissions where feasible, and certainly monitor emissions over time. Also take advantage of the data and the research that is being conducted at our land grant institutions and piloting on certain farms to model emissions and gauge mitigation performance across applicable areas of farm management. This information would be used by policymakers and the industry to continue to make investments in projects that would encompass the continued emission reductions that are needed to meet our targets. This particular strategy really is central and key to the success of all of our other agricultural mitigation efforts. So we propose greater clarity around this particular strategy to address this issue. And I believe that is all we have.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Now we'll turn to economy-wide strategies, and I'll turn it over to Jared Snyder.
Thank you, Sarah. Next slide, please. So this chapter is a little bit different than the others because we didn't provide a draft chapter. Instead, in our discussions with some of the council members, we sought input on a particular approach to a chapter, and we just wanted to quickly run through, what that's looking like right now. And economy-wide strategies would really play three roles. One is ensuring compliance with the statewide greenhouse gas emission limits as required by the Climate Act, which requires a DEC regulation shall ensure that those limits are met. Two, it establishes a source of funding, and three, it would establish a market signal that would yield additional emission reductions. Next slide, please. So the approach that we propose to take is to look at a few different approaches and consider those approaches against a number of policy considerations. Instead of selecting one of the approaches, we would identify, some of the pros and cons looking at these policy considerations, put it out for public comment, and continued discussions among the council in 2022. The three potential approaches we identified would be a carbon tax or fee, a cap and invest program, which also establishes a carbon price indirectly, but also imposes a cap on overall emissions. And a third approach would be sort of a clean energy supply standard, a all fuels-based performance standard requiring that the energy sources used in New York State become cleaner over time, not just electricity, but all energy sources. And so we have a whole list of policy considerations here. I just want to identify a few that were emphasized by council members. One was, how would the policy prioritize emission reductions of greenhouse gases and co-pollutants in disadvantaged communities, which is a requirement of the CLCPA? How affordable would the policy be to the average New Yorker? Can it be designed to avoid regressive impacts? Can the policy be designed to stimulate economic development and innovation? How would the policy interact with applicable regulatory standards? So we'll have a number of regulatory standards coming, that have been presented today and are in the draft plan. How would a economy-wide approach sort of mesh with those standards and provide additional emission reductions? And then is a policy equitable across regions of the state? Those are a number of new considerations raised by council members, and barring any additional input, what we would do is draft the chapter to sort of reflect this kind of evaluation and put it out for public comment. So that's it.
Thank you, Jared. Next slide, and I'll turn it over to Sarah Crowell from Department of State to walk through both the land use and then the local government chapter. Sarah?
Sure. Hi. Thanks, Sarah. And I know we're a little short on time, so I will go as quickly as I can. Can I have the next slide? And that one. Awesome. So in the land use, we didn't have a lot. Key points to incorporate, though, in this section are we're asked to revisit, we're planning to revisit the strategy section, sort of the full strategy section, to incorporate additional details and some specifics, just to more fully define the scale of investment needed for full implementation. That was one of the requests we got. And the other one, the other point we're going to incorporate is to specify throughout that renewable energy land uses include wind, solar, storage, and electric vehicle charging. And so can I have the next slide, please? Awesome. We have a little more here. We had just a few unresolved issues. Hope you all can see this, but we were asked to add language to specify that incentives should be based on proximity of generation, renewable generation to current load centers and or economic development sites that could combine infrastructure planning to incorporate renewable energy storage and increase electrical capacity, and also related infrastructure to both achieve CLCPA goals and ensure site readiness of selected locations for economic growth. We think this makes sense. We think we're part of the way there, but we would suggest adding this language in the land use, the strategy number 8, which relates to providing guidance and support on clean energy siting to localities. Under the first recommendation, develop new planning tools and resources. And we also may want to add, in addition to talking about proximity of generation, we may want to add current land uses such as agriculture, wetlands, forest, et cetera, as additional considerations in the section on clean energy siting. So that is the first one. There was also a request to add a recommendation to put a moratorium on deforestation for the purposes of renewable energy, and or to reject state subsidies, et cetera, for projects involving deforestation at any level. And there is already a recommendation in the chapter to mitigate the impact from renewable energy projects, on forests and on ag uses. That's in the third, that's land use strategy number 3, which is avoid agriculture and forested land conversion. I want to point out that while a full moratorium on deforestation could pose challenges to meeting statewide energy goals, it really is important. I think we all agree to limit deforestation of natural and mature forests, which are really important for greenhouse gas to prevent greenhouse gas emissions. So to this end, we suggest revising and expanding that existing land use strategy to add that in some cases it may be appropriate or necessary to reject state subsidies, tax credits, and renewable energy credits in forests with high carbon, climate, and other related benefits. And finally, there was a comment that, not finally, the third one down is there was a comment that municipal comp planning and rezoning takes time. And that leads to a concern that development, contrary to the Climate Act, could continue in the interim. And so to avoid this, it was suggested that cities be encouraged to adopt moratoriums while they adopt their comprehensive plans and zoning updates. This would avoid sort of a rush of development trying to get in before zoning changes. So the land use chapter, so we would propose, I think this makes sense, and we would propose that adding to the land use chapter the current strategy, which recommends that providing financial and technical assistance to municipalities to implement comp plans and zoning that are consistent with the CLCPA. So we recommend assisting municipalities to do this. While we can't mandate that localities implement moratoriums in the interim, we can add a specific recommendation here that under the strategy to provide guidance and assistance that would help them adopt moratoriums against specific types of development while they're going through their comp planning and zoning process. And the last issue here in this section was that there was some concern about the availability of sufficient EPF funding to ensure that municipalities are actually able to develop and adopt smart growth comp plans and zoning, acknowledging that there's, that there's a capacity issue and a lot of municipalities that, and we really do need enough municipalities actually going through this process to make a difference in our development patterns statewide. So there are a couple of strategies that already suggest expanding existing grant technical assistance programs and also about potentially adding new grants and support to municipalities. So we can, in order to address this comment, we can further strengthen those recommendations and add that the state should increase funding available, specifically say that the state should increase funding available to further accelerate the development of smart growth plans and zoning ordinances. So I think that about covers land use. Should we move on to local government? All right, next slide. And next, wait. Oh, keep going. Awesome. So we just had three issues here that I want to highlight. One is that some folks pointed out that there are several towns and cities, notably Ithaca, have voted to electrify their buildings or fleets or entire city, as in Ithaca's case. And it was suggested that these specific examples be added and include discussion on how the state will fund or support replication of these efforts. Municipal efforts can be supported through technical assistance and funding from a couple of existing programs, the Climate Smart Communities and Clean Energy Communities programs. We can revisit the local government chapter to ensure that this is clear, that electrification is a goal of these programs, and we can also highlight some of the relevant case studies, such as notably the city of Ithaca's really ambitious electrification plans, and highlight those and discuss those as relevant case studies that may require reaching out to some municipalities and communities to build those out. But I think that may address this issue. There was also a request to consider using the state's permitting and registration powers to avoid fossil fuel development while cities and local governments update their comprehensive plans. This state permitting powers, it's difficult to have state permitting powers and to anticipate local government action. We can recommend, though, that we can include a recommendation that guidance on local government moratoriums can be expanded to specifically reference fossil fuel infrastructure, such as gas stations, during comprehensive plan and zoning updates. So the goal here to avoid permitting something that may be, fossil fuel development that may be made disallowed when the new comp plans that are consistent with the Climate Act be adopted. The goal could be addressed through local moratoriums. So that's what we suggest here. Finally, there was some feedback on the recommendation to prioritize methane recovery from wastewater treatments and landfills. That recommendation is currently limited to on-site energy production, but the comment was that the scoping plan should also address more comprehensive use of biofuels generated from methane recovery, and note that they can be used in a more used more broadly. So I think what we'd like to do is seek additional direction from Climate Action Council members regarding the other scenarios that we may want to include for public comment in this section. So we'd ask for additional guidance there, and I just want to point out that we do need to make sure that anything that we include in the local government section should be consistent with the waste chapter recommendation on biogas use. So we'll work with the folks working on the waste chapter section on that. And that covers local government.
Thank you, Sarah. And that segues us nicely into the waste chapter. I'll turn it back over to Jared Snyder.
All right, thanks, Sarah. Let's skip ahead a slide. Thank you. There's really sort of three unresolved issues here that we wanted to highlight. One was a comment that the CLCPA's requirement of zero emission electricity by 2040 seems to bar the use of incinerators for electricity generation. And, would that also apply to waste combustion as a waste management process? Our recommendation here is that the question of the applicability of the zero emission requirement to incineration would be addressed by the Public Service Commission. Another comment was how to address the remaining waste after existing recommendations are adopted. Our estimate is probably somewhere in the range of 15% of the current waste stream would still be there would still be a disposal need for that waste after all the recommendations are adopted. And so our proposed resolution here would be for DEC to track technology developments and to revisit this question when the council gets back together in reviewing the scoping plan review, because technologies will change, and that should inform how we address that remaining waste stream in the future. And the third comment was to prioritize regular measurement and monitoring of methane emissions from landfills. And again, we suggest that DEC would track the technology developments and require the use of any new technologies that are proven, because we agree that it's essential to measure and monitor the methane emissions, and that informs actions to reduce those emissions. So those are our recommendations on the unresolved issues.
Thanks,
Back to you,
Jared.
Sarah.
And I do just see that we've got a number of comments coming in the chat function. So this is great. Thank you, panelists, for indulging us with this. If we can now go ahead to the next chapter, we'll talk about climate justice, and I'll turn this over to Maureen Letty.
Thank you, Sarah. Next slide, please. And we'll pass this one. This is just as we have been. So some key feedback from the council on the content in the climate justice chapter. There was a desire for stronger statements on the disadvantaged communities to fit this definition, and the benefits and how state decision making in the scoping plan we'll wrap all of that information together, that there should be a whole of government approach around climate justice and the way it solves common problems, to have more emphasis on prioritizing reductions of co-pollutants in disadvantaged communities, and to include an emphasis on the requirement of agency decision-making to avoid disproportionate burden as described in Section 7.3 of the CLCPA. And there was also a comment to add language about affordable housing programs within the list of the components table, which I believe is in reference to the Climate Justice Working Group feedback. Next slide. And then a couple of unresolved issues, some of them so very straightforward feedback on the prior slide, but these few issues need a little thought, that there should be guidance for agencies, with regards to Section 7 on prioritizing emissions reductions in disadvantaged communities to avoid creating additional burdens in decision making and keeping in line with greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals. So a proposed resolution is, with input from EJ community representatives, DEC and other agencies need to develop guidance. DEC is developing guidance that would hopefully serve as a model for other agencies on how agencies can comply with these requirements of the law, and to have that be done in a coordinated fashion across agencies. There was another issue around discussion on gender, the gender lens on climate, including women, femmes, and girls on the front line. And the proposed resolution is to have further discussion by the council on that specific topic. Next slide, I think we'll move up to the next section of the initial draft.
Great, thank you, Maureen. And for the Just Transition chapter, I'm going to turn it over to John Williams from NYSERDA.
Great, thanks, Sarah. And if we could just bump up a couple slides. Good, so easy to talk quickly about these key points to incorporate. Certainly how the Just Transition work is going to be implemented with the final plan. I think that's relatively easy for us to get there. Take a more forward view on future job types, illustrative of a new economy, and certainly we heard that a little bit earlier today with some of the output from the job study. So we'll be able to incorporate that a little bit more readily into the draft scoping plan now. And then lastly, adding some specificity to some of the recommendations on how we get to more action and not just examining and studying various job impact issues. So we can look to try to get a little bit more specific on some of those actions. Next slide, please. And then on some of the unresolved issues through the discussions, taking a look at other economic development opportunities, an issue that was raised earlier today. Our proposed resolution is to utilize results from the job study to the extent that we can, and looking at those subsectors and identifying how we can match that with new economic opportunity. I think, as we had also heard, there's probably some follow-on work that we can do on the job study, and we'll see about incorporating that over time. Next issue was to look at information and add some more information on the evaluation of labor standards is too broad. So the way to resolve this is to refine the language in the draft and looking to include some strengthened language on labor standards, including prevailing wage, project labor agreements, and where we do see where some of those sectors are being implemented and opportunities looking forward. The next issue that we had heard was looking to seek engagement in the business community a bit more, and how the business community can help to craft and advance other climate solutions than what our recommendations are talking about. Agree with this, and the agency staff that's been engaged in the Just Transition group, including those at Empire State Development who we did some cross-teaming with during the advisory panel process, will work together to add some increased and augmented language to capture just these thoughts. And then lastly, looking at the work of the power plant inventory and how we support communities that have power plant closures, and a recommendation to try to prioritize some of those communities. The way that we can look at that is look at the various characteristics and maybe spell that out a little bit more on the factors that need to be taken into consideration as we think about these communities experiencing power plant transitions, and we want to make sure we're capturing and assessing all of those considerations as we think about next generation economic activity for those communities. And so that is something that we will certainly look to do. And with that, Sarah, I think those were our issues in just transition.
Great, thank you, John. We'll now turn to the health chapter, and I'll hand it over to Henry Spletoff at Department of Health.
Thanks, Sarah. Can you advance 2 slides, please? Okay, great, thank you. So we got a number of great comments from CIC members, very, I think, helpful. And first of all, the one broad brush kind of comment we got was that the public health story is a really important pillar of the scoping plan, and that we need to really tell the story well to emphasize that climate change has many health effects, and that there are obviously corresponding huge benefits to climate policies, and we need to tell the story better. So we tried to tell that story, but we will try to see what we can do to emphasize that more. And similarly, another large comment had to do with disadvantaged communities, and again, highlighting that story more. That obviously something mentioned in a big part of the CLCPA, and disadvantaged communities have health disparities already and are more vulnerable to the effects of climate change, and therefore may benefit most from adequate climate policies. So some smaller omissions or areas where we needed to provide more detail. Parks and green spaces, a CAC member emphasized, were really important in not only mitigating heat island effects, but providing opportunities for exercise and many other public health benefits, and we can certainly beef up that part of our chapter. One comment was about the link between COVID-19 vulnerability or other infectious disease vulnerabilities to existing disease burdens and low air or poor air quality. And that's an area where the literature has been evolving lately, and it's a fairly new topic, and we didn't incorporate it. And so I'm grateful for that comment. I think it's an important issue, and we will add that into the chapter. Other things that we didn't mention, or at least didn't mention enough: mental health effects. It was in a figure in our chapter, but not in the text. We did mention, for example, Hurricane Ida, but we didn't mention Superstorm Sandy, which had tremendous health impacts in the New York City area and also Long Island. So I believe we can add that without a problem. Wood burning, we saw from the integration analysis results that wood burning, or the elimination of wood burning, provides a huge public health benefit. So therefore, the comment was to discuss that more. It's a big issue in rural areas, obviously, and so we can address that in the chapter as well. Other comments similar to the building chapter, we got a comment that electrification of appliances improves indoor air quality, and we should emphasize that, and that ambient air quality impacts are often near the source of emissions and therefore affect the communities they're in, the disadvantaged communities often. Biofuel combustion, like other chapters, I think Ag and Markets, for example, or the Agriculture and Forestry chapter received this comment as well, but we need to be consistent in the treatment of biofuel emissions and in our case, public health impacts. And then finally, it was suggested that we mention the health benefits of system energy reliability and potential impacts of disruptions to that. I think that's all we had, all comments that can be addressed, I think. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Henry. And then finally, we'll turn to the Adaptation and Resilience chapter, and I'll hand it over to Mark Lowry from DEC to walk us through that one.
Thank you, Sarah. Good afternoon. As we advance to the feedback slide, I'll just mention that I think, like Henry's group, it doesn't sound like we had much objection to content. In our discussions, no one suggested that we drop any of the recommendations we had in the Adaptation and Resilience chapter. Rather, the discussion focused on things that we should make sure to include or to emphasize more. So I will try to repeat and summarize the key points along those lines. We heard that better coordination among agencies and different levels of government is needed in planning of our state infrastructure investments, particularly as such investments might affect the resilience of disadvantaged communities. We heard that the state should do more to ensure the availability of flood insurance, including for renters, not just individual homeowners, while addressing the disproportionate impacts that high insurance premiums can have on lower income households and disadvantaged communities. We heard that the state should take a more strategic approach to identifying the most vulnerable communities in the state and supporting those communities in their decisions as to whether and how to withdraw from vulnerable areas. We hear repeatedly of the value of green infrastructure, and including in that definition of green infrastructure was urban forestry in alleviating the effects of heat and drought, extreme precipitation and flooding, and that the state should act more strategically and expeditiously in providing these types of resources, especially in disadvantaged communities. We heard support for the appointment of a chief state resilience officer, but we're cautioned that this officer must consider the various regional resilience needs across the state, and in particular should coordinate with the disaster response agencies, while at the same time not focusing exclusively on disaster response. And one other point we heard that I'll mention, although it's not on the slide, was the recognition that implementation of many of the components included in the adaptation and resilience strategies will require significant funding and would likely only be possible with the passage of an Environmental Bond Act to support them. Again, I don't see any of these as unresolved issues, but areas for which we should provide additional emphasis in the chapter, and we will certainly endeavor to do that.
Great, thank you, Mark. And so now we're gonna actually, before we go to the next steps, now we're gonna actually try to turn back and have an open discussion of the council members on the topics that seem to be generating the most interest. And from what I can gauge from the chat, that looks like the gas system transition, potentially the land use, the gender lens piece and climate justice, and then the cost information. And so if we go in that order, if we can go back to slide 59 on the gas system transition. And here, then we would like to open it up to council members to state any questions or comments here. And I'm not sure if any of these are legacy, but I do see that Raya, Bob, and Gavin all have their hands up, and it appears to be in that order.
All right. I'm looking at the slide and I'm sort of like, when you, I guess what, maybe, you know what, I will pass to the next person. I'm trying to understand what, you know, what it is that we are, what is the feedback that you're asking for here? I think what I seem to hear is that there seems to be a minority in the chat anyway, a minority position about concern about decommissioning. And I think that's probably what I was responding to. So I'll pass to the next person.
Okay, Bob.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Let me just start by saying I really appreciate the incredible amount of work that the staff put into writing this draft overall, and I appreciate Sarah, you giving me extension on getting my comments in until just 8 days ago, just before the Thanksgiving week. You guys have clearly been working on it hard since, so I commend you all for that and for all of the presentations we've heard today. I do want to talk specifically about the gas transition issue. I think it's probably, to me, the most problematic, outstanding thing that's still before us. And I was quite surprised when I read the draft of Chapter 18, which addressed that. I really didn't think it was responsive to the large amount of panel input from the Housing and Energy Efficiency panel or from some of the other panels. So let me highlight my major concerns. We are in agreement, at least I think we are, that we need to move to beneficial electrification of heating, and we need to do so rapidly. And all of the chapters which address that talk about a fairly rapid reduction in the use of natural gas, probably cutting it in half within the next 12 to 15 years and taking it to near zero by 2050. So in that context, we have this large gas infrastructure system. A lot of it in the state is more than 100 years old. It's if we're really going to maintain it, we need to put some substantial resources into rebuilding it and making it safe. And we need to make it as safe as possible while we go ahead with the transition to move away from natural gas. But I'm highly concerned with the thought that anyone would see value, or that our council would say there's value in having that transition, that transmission system, the distribution system in place, certainly by 2050. And there's some talk that, well, it can be used for renewable natural gas. Well, maybe it could be used for hydrogen. And I want to specifically address that. And this is coming out of work that the panels did. The Ag and Forestry panel had a sub-panel that worked specifically on renewable natural gas, and the whole panel worked on it. I worked with them on that. I gave a briefing on it a year ago. The Waste Management panel worked on that. It also came up in the Housing and Energy Efficiency panel. And the consensus out of all of that is if we took all of the agricultural waste, all of the manure in the state, and we took all of the sewage in the state, and we took all of the leaking methane from landfills in the state, and we really worked hard to capture that in renewable natural gas, it at most would come out to be 2.5% to 3% of our current use of natural gas. You cannot put that into a gas distribution system and have it work. And we need to acknowledge that. To say otherwise is misleading the decision makers of the state, the population of the state. So I feel very strongly about that. As for hydrogen, the gas industry has been actively promoting for 2 to 3 years now this thought that, sure, we need to move away from fossil gas, but hydrogen provides a way forward. The evidence is that you cannot put hydrogen into the existing gas distribution systems of the sort we have in New York. It's never been done anywhere. People are arguing about whether you can blend hydrogen in with fossil gas at levels of 10% or 20 or 30%. No one anywhere who works in the field has suggested you can do more than 30%, and that hasn't been proven. And so when we're talking about hydrogen in the future, it doesn't work in the gas distribution system unless we are still using fossil gas there too, which I think we are agreeing not to do. And finally, let me just on hydrogen too, in our report, I think there's an excessive emphasis even on the green hydrogen from electrolysis. I'm concerned about that. And some of the subnotes in the report say that in order to meet that demand, we'll be importing hydrogen from out of state for half of our hydrogen use. That's even without putting into the pipeline systems, as far as I can tell. And I find that very problematic, because how do we ensure that that's really green hydrogen and not hydrogen made from fossil gas out of state? What sort of an assurance system would we have? My final point goes to the dual fuels thing. In some future time when we're primarily using heat pumps, is there a need for fossil gas on those really, really cold winter days? And for sure, the cold winter days are important, and we need to address them. There are a variety of ways to address them, and I do think that the ground source heat pumps over air source heat pumps are a good way to go. There are other ways to go. But I think the dual fuel idea is just a non-starter. I mean, the thought that we leave a fossil gas distribution system alive as long as 2050, and we only use that gas for 2 to 3 weeks out of the coldest winter periods to augment other heating systems, I think that's crazy. I mean, in the meanwhile, you're keeping that system in place. You have to maintain it. It's very expensive. It's going to become more expensive if you use it less. And The methane emissions are now higher from those systems than we thought. There's a paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences last month for Boston saying that we've severely underestimated those emissions. And those emissions will remain high whether we're using that gas year round or not. If you have a pressurized gas system, it will leak. And so it will not reduce our emissions. I feel very strongly that we need as a council to commit to decommissioning in an organized way the gas distribution system. So thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I see Gavin has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Like Bob said and others, there's an awful lot of information here. Some of this scoping plan is very good, and I appreciate the work that's gone into that. However, I think it is lacking in a number of ways, and I know you wanted to talk about gas distribution system. I just wanted to emphasize a point that I disagree with Bob. It's not the gas industry looking solely to promote hydrogen. The state of New York is doing it today. We have a pilot project through NYPA to do this, and we have major investments by the state and a commitment by NYPA to do that. So I think the fact that we need to find dispatchable resources as we try to take the gas system apart is something we need to seriously consider. The ISO needs to be more engaged in that conversation because I don't think it is engaged at this time. And I just feel like we're shortchanging the public. I mean, Bob and I may disagree on some of this stuff, but we're putting out a scoping plan that doesn't say anything about how we're paying for any of this. It doesn't talk about affordability, and it certainly doesn't do anything to give me a level of comfort on what the future reliability of the system will be. So we need to, as a council, identify a way that we're going to deal with these massive holes in this plan. Are we going to have a system where we're going to meet weekly to try to resolve what I think are the real bread and butter issues that are being avoided by this draft? And I think it's really, we're shortchanging the public, and we're not really doing our jobs because we're not getting to those threshold issues. And there's more to say, but there's others that need to speak. I just thought I would give you my impression of we're leaving the substance on the side of the road here, and it's too important to do that.
Thank you, Gavin. Peter?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Well, just on Gavin's last point, I mean, I don't know if you feel like it would be covered in there, but I was listening to Gavin or Jared talking about Chapter 17 and felt like economy-wide strategies, which isn't the draft before us now, but will be in the next iteration. We'll get to that concept of how we pay for some of this stuff, and I think that's going to be important text for all of us to be digging in on. So I guess stay tuned, Gavin. We'll all see it soon, more than just the bullet points. So I want to just focus a little bit on the transportation sector, if that's okay, Sarah. I don't know if you were trying to go in order with the slides in front of us, but there's some key things. I also want to associate with with the comments that Bob Howarth laid out for renewable natural gas and hydrogen. I completely agree with Bob's perspective on that, and I think it's a point that we should consider, points that should be deeply considered in our next iteration. On the transportation sector,
Peter, if I could just pause, and we are trying to keep this a little bit like the discussion centered. So can we come back to transportation? We'll
okay.
add that at the end, and because it sounds like, or it seemed like we might have had a couple other hands up, and I'll just ask Donna and Anne. I see your hands are up, and also back to Raya. Did you want to comment on the gas system transition before we move on?
Just to be associated with Bob's comments on it, but I look forward to transportation when we get to that level of the bike rack.
Yeah, sorry, Peter, just trying to stay organized.
Yeah, and
Donna or Ann?
Thank you, Sarah and everybody, and I agree. What a great amount of work, and I hope the comments we're making verbally are not supposed to be the limit of our comments, because I really couldn't type fast enough into the chat function and read the slides. So hope we still have the opportunity to comment further. Just back to Bob's comments. I have a dissenting view on this for sure. We're talking about the importance of resilience and reliability for the state of New York, and to just sort of jump to a decommissioning of the gas system, to me, is just highly extreme, and without having cost impacts assessed, I just don't feel like it's fair, or responsible. So I guess I just like to add that to the record. you know, the system, you know, when we talk about energy delivery and making sure that it's going to hold up in cold weather, and during weather events, and we have this underground infrastructure that's providing heat to something like 60% of the state today, far more in the cold climates. I think we need to just carefully assess moves that we're suggesting and the implications for consumers. So I guess enough said about that, and then I'd be happy to add more about renewable natural gas, because I think it's really something that's being looked at differently in other states. So I feel like New York's getting left behind and consumers are getting left behind to some extent with the way that we're viewing it. And I think that the potential is far greater than is being suggested. Happy to get you more on that, and I think we've already provided it. So I guess I can stop there, but I'd be happy to add more later.
Thanks, Donna. Anne?
Well, I was going to say I feel like what Bob's saying is very compelling, that it's hard to imagine that we can meet these goals without decommissioning the gas system. Although I agree that it's a huge undertaking, and as Donna said, so I feel like the plan should say that, be clear about that. Now, I found the 2.5 to 3% to be very compelling. So if there's different percentages, then we should say that too. I know Carl mentioned that we specifically did an RNG potential study as part of it, but even if it's, even if it's 10% or 15%, it's still a minority of it. And maybe the recommendation is that we need a subsequent study about how New York could decommission the gas system and how it could help happen in an organized way, as Bob is pointing out. I mean, I hear what he's saying, that if we're talking about meeting these climate goals, then we're going to have to transition away from natural gas. And if we maximize RNG production, if that gets us to 10% of the gas system, then is the best use for that gas in the system for heating, or is it some other use of it that's better? So maybe the recommendation has to, at a minimum, not solving this difference of opinion, but be a recommendation that in 2022 or sometime soon, New York should do a comprehensive assessment of what it would take to move away from the gas system, to decommission the gas system. I'd also say that I really disagree with Gavin's comment that we're not looking at costs at all. I mean, the integration analysis is a society-wide view of the entire plan and what the costs and benefits would be. It would be impossible to do a cost assessment of the entire plan now at the level that this plan is. So for example, when we did a study of how to decommission the gas system, and with some dates, of when we'd be doing it, then we could assess the specific costs of that and the impact of consumers of that. The way, for example, New York did the 70% by 2030 order at the commission and did a very comprehensive study of what the impact to ratepayers would be. So I'm not disagreeing that we need studies of what the impacts to ratepayers would be, but I think that we all know that it's not feasible to do it at that level of detail for a plan at this level. And secondly, like Peter said, I think that chapter that Jarrett reviewed about economy-wide methods, economy-wide policies and how we pay for it is very important to include in here. He's right, we need to talk about how we're going to pay for it, but I'm hoping that the plan will through that chapter.
Thanks, Anne. And maybe I can just clarify a point to, I guess, what we intended and what we would like to clarify going forward in the gas system transition chapter. When we were talking about maintaining or the potential to maintain portions of the gas system, it was really intended to be, I think we were talking about very small portions, and the idea that I think we would want to be more specific to talk about kind of the strategic decommissioning, that it needs to be very well planned, and that it would not necessarily be we're keeping the whole gas system and doing some sort of blending. So obviously we've got some work to do to clarify that in the document. But I do agree, Anne, with what you're saying in terms of the volume. I've heard a similar number from Carl's analysis that it's on the order of maybe 10% maximum of kind of the the fuel that we would need. And so I think that there's some room certainly for improvement to be more clear and direct when we are, if we're saying there's the potential to kind of throw out a couple examples of where that could be. But we're not trying, this isn't like we're sticking our toe in the door to, drive a natural gas truck through. So I think we definitely have a lot of space to kind of clarify here. But I just wanted to kind of to say that a little bit. I know it doesn't probably address everyone's concerns. I do see Tom Falcone has his hand up and would like to turn to him.
Actually, to follow on your comment, Sarah, I mean, I was just going back and thinking about Carl's presentation from October 1st and October 14th. And, the key stats that I remember were that New York would get about 70% of its energy needs from zero carbon electricity. That was really the fuel of the future. But to make that zero carbon electric grid work, we needed about 20 gigawatts of zero carbon dispatchable resource. And we don't have that technology today, but one of the possible technologies that exists, and there are others, would be green hydrogen made from excess renewable production. So, having done many of these studies in the past and being involved in one for Long Island right now, I would just caution my fellow council members that it's probably best to make the decisions we have to make today, but not try and predict the technology trends or what we may need to do or what may develop. And whether green hydrogen is good or not good is going to be evident to us in future scoping plans based on how the technology develops. Maybe there'll be other great technologies, maybe there'll be battery breakthroughs or whatever. But I don't think we have to decide what we need in 2040 today. I think what we really have to focus on is what are the key actions and deliverables for the next 5 years, because we're all going to do the scoping plan again and recognize that there are some uncertainties in the back end.
Thank you. I also see that we've got a couple additional hands up. We've got Dennis and then Paul. And maybe something to consider is, Anne, it seemed like throughout a recommendation or a potential recommendation that we, include something about a recommendation around a subsequent study to understand how we can have an orderly decommissioning of the gas system or decarbonization of the gas system. So perhaps that's something that folks might want to weigh in here on as well, so that we have so that staff has a very clear understanding of what changes the council would like to be made to the draft scoping plan to make it your draft and not just a staff work product. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dennis.
Thanks, Sarah. So we're talking about the transition, and when we talk about this stuff, all I think about is the individuals who've built businesses like these greenhouses that have built CHP systems because there's just no infrastructure there. So part of this discussion, I think, is that we got to really consider the impact on business and then make that part of whatever the transitional plan is. But there's real businesses out there that have been created. And by the way, probably are going to start ramping up because of the decisions being made on recreational cannabis. So I always try and caution when we talk, we talk almost like we're disconnected from individuals that could be directly impacted. And I just want to make sure that we have that information while we're reviewing this as part of the Climate Action Council.
Thank you, Dennis. Paul Shepson?
I just wanted to comment that I feel like I have heard a false choice being discussed between decommissioning natural gas use and having reliable electric power and cold weather heating. And I don't believe that that is a choice that we're faced with. We need, as was said by Sarah, an orderly transition. And to me, the real issue is how we're going to finance all of this. And I really look forward to that additional material that's coming into the plan. And I'll just restate that I support Bob's comments. Thank you.
Thank you. So it sounds like if we make some of the clarifications that I mentioned, that might be helpful. Does that seem sufficient for council members here? And we can move on to the next topic area, or is there further discussion on how we want to modify the gas system transition chapter?
Well, what if you could restate the clarifications, and also given that this is supposed to end at 5, I'm just very concerned. I don't know where we have the time to finish going through all of these slides, and where will we be on process in terms of of how we're going to resolve these issues going forward. And I guess I'll just say, I feel like having a gender lens on this plan, it was more of an omission than in controversy. And let's not put ourselves in a position where we're debating I don't know what that even looks like, where we're debating whether or not, a gender lens should be included in the discussion on climate justice. What does that debate even look like? If anyone is against that, I think you should just go ahead and say it right now. So we could move past it.
So in terms of the clarifications, so I had said that we would clarify that when we're talking, we talk about the scale when we're talking about the potential for other fuels other than, essentially electrification. And so that we would be more specific about when we're talking about decommissioning or decarbonization, that we would try to be more clear in our language to be specific about kind of the scope and scale of what we're talking about. And where we do have statements that say, about electrification to the maximum extent practicable, that we're actually identifying the small number of unique situations or at least examples of what we mean by that, because we're not meaning, open the door wide open. And so trying to be more specific about, we're not talking about having the entire gas system around long into the future, that we really are looking at decarbonization, decommissioning in a strategic way. And certainly that's got to be orderly, and it's got to be well planned out in order to make sure that we can implement it in that way.
That sounds helpful. We've got 12 minutes and I'm not, it seems like we need to schedule another meeting in between now and next month. What is our way forward?
Doreen or Basil, can I ask you to weigh in on how you'd like me to handle this in terms of, do we want to push forward here, or?
Sarah, why don't, just looking at the clock and to directly answer Raya's question, why don't you just run, if you go toward the end, if you go through what we are planning next, maybe that would help. I think you had a bit of a timeline, so we can just look at at least what we're heading toward in December.
Sure.
Remember, that was like one of your last slides.
I think it might be the very last slide, number 109, 108, sorry.
Right.
Okay, yep. So the intention was to leave the discussion here today, and that staff would make the approved adjustments to the draft scoping plan with the intention of turning around a revised draft to council members by the 10th. That would give council members 10-day to review the revision prior to meeting on the 20th for a revote on release of the draft plan for public comment. Again, this would be a simple majority vote, not necessarily any sort of an endorsement of any or all of the strategies that are contained in the draft plan. And knowing that there's much more discussion and deliberation that the council needs to have to land some of these issues, frankly. And then ultimately, depending on the decision at the December 20th meeting, if the vote was for approval of releasing the plan for public comment, we would release the plan by January 1st, which is the statutory deadline for doing so. We would also then be kicking off at least a 120-day comment period. There would be a minimum of 6 public hearings that are going to be held, and we're working on figuring out some of the additional details around that, and would come to the meeting in December with a little bit more details around that public comment and public hearing process. I think, the council members have all the proposed resolutions before them. I think what would be helpful is to understand where council members disagree with the proposed approach. Again, we'd be looking at probably on a majority level of trying to make the changes based on what it seems that we could get most council members comfortable with in terms of a compromise position on what's in the draft.
Thanks, Sarah. So I guess to try to think about what happens between now and December 10th, I think there's 2 options. Well, 3 actually, as I see it. We could spend more time tonight and continue to go through the topics that I think, Sarah, maybe you had a few more that you were hoping or sort of highlighting that we could cover. So that's sort of, as I see it, option 1. Option 2 is we could reconvene later this week or next week. Probably it'd have to be this week to take up those 3 or 4 topics at a different time. Alternatively, that feedback could be provided in writing. Maybe that could layer on either one of my options 1 or 2, as to really providing feedback that you might not be able to provide in the meetings themselves. So I don't know if I said there were 4 options, but now I'm not thinking of what a 4th option would be. But I think that's really where we are. The question becomes if, frankly, I think some of this discussion has been quite interesting over the last half an hour. So if people find it useful, we could continue on or meet again later.
I would just say, Doreen, I would prefer to have this in a non-writing way. In other words, have the group together, the coalition together. If we need to continue on this, whether it's today or Friday or whatever, to continue moving and fleshing some of this out, because I agree, it's been helpful to half an hour hearing the exchange, and there's more steam built up that we need to give people a chance to let loose so that we actually get some good direction to our staff. So I would say, the sooner the better. This is top priority. I'll clear my schedule. I'm sure others would as well. I just throw that out there. No reason not to continue talking, whether it's now or in a few days.
This is Rose.
And I agree with the conversation, and I think you can only do it in a conversation. I unfortunately, I have to leave now, but I can catch up, you know, if you go forward. And I also just wanted to say on the decommissioning of natural gas, I think the idea of an orderly transmission just buys us time. It buys us time to further define it. And because I don't think we can solve that ourselves in a conversation. But I'm all for if you either going ahead now or finding some other time and just devote it to discussion. And it's great the way too that, and then everybody should also prioritize what are some of the big issues to discuss and make sure they've already been pointed out or add them to the list.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it is the case that I think we all can increasingly see the value of the scoping plan as drafted, in that it's going to afford us the opportunity to explore these trade-offs, you know, in the coming year and beyond. You know, I don't personally expect that we're going to be in a position, Raya, where things are final, if you will. You know, my typical definition of final is not really what we're heading toward this year. We're heading toward a document that can be released. And frankly, to Gavin's point, we're going to be meeting and exploring all of this next year. I don't think we're getting away from anything in December, and instead we're continuing our work. So with that said, if the members collectively feel that another discussion session is valuable to reach the schedule that Sarah has laid out, I personally will commit to it as well, for sure.
Sounds like we want to speak again.
Yeah, the only thing that I'm wondering if we did try this, because again, it would have to be fairly near term, and I'm going to need, if Val Milanovic is still on as a good example, or Pete Costello, or someone from DEC. I just want to know if we were to try to reconvene for a discussion, I'd want to think about the quorum question and attendance questions that would ensue. So is there any advice from the legal side as to, if we were to convene and it really wasn't a great time for all the members, how we would handle that from a notice and a meeting perspective? Any advice?
So yeah, this is Pete. If the meeting is planned at least a week in advance, notice is required 72 hours prior. But if it is planned less than a week in advance, which sounds like this will be, the notice is just to the extent practicable. In terms of quorum, if we do not have a quorum, we cannot take action. But I don't think there's any formal action until we take the vote. If we do have a quorum, we'll have to follow all of the strictures of the open meetings law.
Quorum is 12.
Well, dust off your schedules, folks.
What are we looking at in terms of a time? I think it's a great idea to do it. I personally cannot do it Friday. I just simply cannot. I could do it either Thursday or Monday, but I'm just one person.
The same is true for me.
Do we want to have Sarah, do you want to caucus everyone to check on availability? And assuming we have a quorum, or even if we don't, how we structure that, how we live stream and everything else.
Sure, absolutely. I can reach out and see if we can find any. I assume tomorrow's not going to work. That's just going to be a little tight, but let's look to see if we can do Thursday or Friday, I'll get a note out to folks to see about availability and interest over the next couple days here.
And I guess a question for those that can't attend, are we able to provide things in writing? Because it might be difficult for everyone. So I guess maybe anything you could let us know about process, it'd be great.
So yeah, that follows open meetings law as well. So if it's in writing, it cannot go to more than a quorum without being in an open meeting.
I'm the one that has to go now. Did you take off the table just extending this a little bit longer? Would that be easier for people?
Feel like we're heading toward a vote here. Just kidding. So Sarah, there were 3 or 4 other topics you were proposing. Let's review what those were. I'm just trying to think about if we were to continue on, how much time are we talking about here?
So based on the information in the chat, I saw that we wanted to discuss slide 86 on land use, slide 96, the climate justice gender lens, slide 55, the cost information, and transportation. I'm not sure if that's probably either slide 70 or 71.
Maybe we can power through.
See what we could do if you would need to drop if we continued. Can you speak up now? Let's start there. How about that? I don't know how that'll work.
This is Rose, and I'm actually dropping right now.
Okay, thanks, Rose.
And good luck, you all.
Have we lost anybody else? I know a couple of others left.
This is Bob, and I'm still with you, but I need to leave within 10 minutes or so. My apologies for that. And just if I do need to drop out and I can't make a meeting on Friday when you pick it up, may I ask that when we get the December 10th revised plan, that the changes be highlighted so that we don't have to slog through the whole thing to see what's been changed?
Oh, that's a helpful suggestion.
Sarah?
Yes. Yep. I believe that was a request that was made in one of the small group sessions, and I think that makes a lot of sense. So you don't have to reread from cover to cover and try to ferret it out yourself. So absolutely, we can do that.
Okay, so it feels like we're losing. Does anyone else have to drop now or soon in the next half hour, say?
Rory had to drop at 4:30.
Yeah. Yep, and I believe we also are about to lose Commissioner Reardon.
Yeah, and this is Donna. I'll have to drop shortly. Stay on as long as I can.
I'd recommend
Okay.
we see what we can schedule the couple of days.
Yep.
Yeah, by
I do
Thursday.
agree.
Thursday if we can.
I do agree. And I think, on that list, I think we could do it in 2 hours. Sarah, at least that's what I'm feeling, maybe a half hour per topic, especially with the benefit of time. Hopefully folks can come with a concise description of their feedback. And for clarity, I expect these slides will be able to get posted and circulated, right? So, so certainly they lay out the points that we intend to cover. So I think we will reconvene with an eye toward Thursday or Friday of this week.
It's Gavin. Thursday doesn't work for me. I'm out of town. Friday does, though, if you need it.
I think we'll do a little poll and see what the options are and how many people we can get, and just pick whichever comes in with the highest.
Sarah, are you grabbing all the comments in the chat box?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much for the flexibility.
No, I think this is a great outcome and good progress, but I think with the benefit of a couple more hours, we'll make even more. So Sarah, you might have had some concluding remarks, so I will turn it to you here.
Well, my concluding remarks were really about the next steps. I will we've already been through those, so I will just say thank you for this discussion. This is quite helpful. I know for some it's we you know there's been comments that we don't have kind of a draft that's out there for public comment, but really what we're trying to do is turn the staff draft into a version that can be a draft for the council to put out, and we want to make sure that it really is the council's plan that is put out. So hopefully folks can continue to bear with us. We'll get these slides posted this evening, or we should be able to get them done this evening, if not first thing tomorrow morning. And I'll be in touch with the poll to see about another reschedule for a couple-hour session to finish up the discussion. So thank you, everyone. Really appreciate all the comments and feedback and discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
You.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Sarah.
Thanks.
Happy birthday, Sarah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You bye.